Yo, this is Alex Mouth of Destiny, and today I have the great pleasure of interviewing Natural Hypertrophy, which, if I'm being honest with you, may just be my favorite fitness channel at the moment. So I highly recommend you all subscribe to him right now. You won't regret it. He has some crazy, detailed discussions on what it really means to be a natural bodybuilder. And I think that Natural Hypertrophy will do an excellent job today, and we're just going to vibe it out, go back and forth. All this is unscripted. It's going to be raw, real. You're going to love this chat. So I want to know, who is natural hypertrophy? Let's start off with a basic question like that. And keep in mind, everything's going to be timestamped. So who are you?
So natural hypertrophy, it started a long time ago, actually. I think the first time I started thinking about it, the name in itself was 5 years ago, way before the channel existed. And it's often like this with me where I have an idea, and before it comes into fruition, there's a lot of work that goes into it until it's the right time. And for me, the right time was when I had my home gym and I knew I could be independent and just make my videos myself. And this is when natural hypertrophy came, into existence. I had the name picked out already. I knew what I wanted to speak about on the channel, and it's all I stand for. It's the ability to grow your body naturally without any outside help. Just you yourself, food, rest, and exercise. That's all you need. And to me, this is the best way I could represent that. When you click on my channel, if you pay attention, you should see that natural hypertrophy. You know exactly what I'm going to be talking about immediately.
Exactly. And when you use the word natural, you mean it in the extreme sense as well. Not that you're averse to taking certain supplements, but you really embody the lifestyle and believe that we're capable of a lot more. Because some people will use the term natural very loosely, but they don't actually believe in the message. And when I watch your videos, I get the sense that you're all in on this. Like, this is the way, and you truly believe in your messages, and you can see with the emotions and passions that you have for natural bodybuilding, and also what it could have been as well, which we're going to get into later. So it's pretty clear. You go on your channel. Actually, I discovered you because you kept leaving comments on my videos, right?
Yep.
And you'd write some fun stuff and some great points too. And I was like, man, maybe I should just click on his channel. You reeled me in. So I went in, I started watching your videos, and I was like, whoa, this isn't just a spammer or a guy that's mindlessly seeking attention. You have something to offer. And after going through a few videos, I was hooked already. So it's not only clear with the comments you write, but the moment you get on that channel, yeah, natural hypertrophy, it's what it is.
Yeah, and I got you with the comments, and I got most of my subs with the comments as well, where I write something, I'm like, intriguing. And then they see the name, they see the bicep,
Yeah,
they're like, okay, let's check it out, let's see how it functions. Not once have I ever advertised or said, come to my channel, or even said
exactly.
I have a channel. I just banked on the fact that I knew people would be interested by the comment itself, and then maybe I could take them in. And
Exactly.
that's most of my old subscribers that are going to be watching this. That's how they found the channel. It's not through recommendations, because we both know how it functions when you're a small channel. You get none of that.
Exactly.
So to build a base of people who are going to start the adventure with me and make the bulk of the community, this is the way I picked.
And what's awesome is that you started it off authentic from the get-go. There's no fakeness when you go over to your channel. In fact, it's probably even too real for many to handle. And that creates a community of like-minded individuals who think in a similar way to you and aren't fanboys either, in the sense that they're able to disagree in a respectful way, right? So beyond that part, the whole growing the YouTube channel stuff, which I believe it'll continue to do well because you are offering something unique. What is your training background?
So it's a big emphasis on my channel as well, where I always make sure that I tell the subscribers where I started, because my beginning was I was incredibly small. Like most people wouldn't believe, I was 110 pounds when I was 15. That's ridiculously small. And I grew up to 6 feet and I was around the same weight. And thankfully, I started training during my growth spurt. But I know that I wouldn't have had much of an increase in weight if I hadn't done it, because I was most people would call an ectomorph. I was always very skinny with spaghetti arms, chicken legs, everything small, and my frame was also small. And that's, I think, the key component of this entire thing is still to this day, my frame is small. It hasn't grown. I have very narrow shoulders, and I've always had them. But the thing is that luckily for me, when I got started, I had no one to go blah 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 in my ears about, oh, you'll always be small and there's no point. Some people tried, but they didn't have
Right.
the background in fitness to impress me enough. All I thought about was, okay, you're 40 and you have a beer belly, you know absolutely nothing about that. So let me just do it and I'll show it to you in 2 years. I'll be much bigger. And I kept doing that and doing that. And I kept growing because in reality, when you don't have naysayers polluting your mind with negativity, sky's the limit because you just keep
Mm-hmm.
going at it. Most people, they don't realize it. They screw themselves up because they stop. Because at some point, someone told them, oh, there's no point. And even if there was results, they were talked out of actually training. And so they never actually got to see what they could have been as a man.
Exactly.
And so for me, I was lucky enough that I was way past that when all of that YouTube fitness stuff, all of that negativity started pouring through the screen. I was already bulletproof. I was prepared. You couldn't tell me, oh, you'll never be big because of your small frame, because I had already put 60 pounds on my frame. So by
Mm-hmm.
default, I know you're wrong. And if I know you're wrong then, I also know that you're wrong now and forever. If I could gain that weight, I can continue gaining weight. So from 110, I made it all the way to today, 210. That's 100 pounds over the span of 12 years of
Yeah.
non-stop training.
And it's important to know this was 12 years, not 1 or 2 years, which a lot of
Yes.
people throw in the towel when they see they're not that buff yet. Not understanding that natural bodybuilding is a long-term pursuit. Now, in your case, like even with the fat naysayers and all that, that wasn't really a problem because there's also the different culture of back then. For example, even the start of YouTube Fitness, you've been around for a long time. You've seen it, right? It was pretty encouraging to the
Hmm.
point where we actually thought we were going to look like fake natties. At least I thought I did until I discovered it years later. But guess what? I was already buff by then, so it didn't matter. And so I feel like the paradigm has shifted completely to the opposite side. It used to be you can do anything when the guy's obviously pinning like there's no tomorrow. Now it's the complete opposite. Oh, you're gonna have to settle for this. You can only bench so much naturally. You can only get so big. The charts, the muscle gaining expectations are wrong. It's actually way less than that. But because we came from a different time frame, which wasn't that long ago, as well as having what you like to call the male power fantasy, I feel like that just kept the fire going because myself, I was also very skinny, 120 pounds, and I had family members say, "You're not going to be big. You're tiny." You look at yourself or me back then. No way are you assuming, wow, these people are going to be fitness influencers. They're going to have a YouTube channel. They're going to be putting up these crazy numbers. But look what happened. And I believe if we would have, not us, but in general, if someone is of a similar stature and they go into YouTube Fitness today, they'll automatically have that negative mindset going in, and they'll never realize their true potential. I never thought I was going to bench 405. Just to say, if I would have listened to the guys today, maybe I would have stopped at 275 when I got my first plateau, the natural limit. And then what do these people do? Become enhanced. So I think it's important to differentiate between the past and what is today, including the old school bodybuilders, because no one talked about genetics back then.
Yep. Yeah, and you pointed out something interesting just now with the paradigm shifting, because to me, it's one and the same, right? You were pointing out the fact that it used to be everything is possible, and now nothing is possible. But the
Exactly.
two are just the natural evolution of one another, because it's all of these liars that have created the situation we're dealing with. When you sell dreams to people and you tell them, oh, you can do this and you can do that, and look at me, you can get the same level, and people find out that it's not possible, it breaks their spirit. And when their spirit is broken, it's left broken. And now they can go nowhere. So the middle ground was never hit. And the middle ground is reality. People live in fantasy land. So it's either fake natty bullshit or nothing is possible black pill and I'm going to be small forever. And as you were
Right.
saying, imagine if the younger versions of us found YouTube fitness in the state it is today. What would happen to us? Well, the answer is very similar. We would either end up enhanced or black pilled. Because to me, if I think back to what I was, you give me YouTube fitness when I'm 110 pounds, I'm immediately going to think, okay, I'm screwed. This is me for the rest of my life unless I take drugs. So I have two choices. Neither of them are appealing or sustainable, but I have to make one or the other because it's the only reality I have available to me. And what we do, our true versions, the versions that were salvaged by timing in reality, is helping people that are like us. We show them that reality, the middle ground that should be the majority on YouTube Fitness, but is in reality the minority. And we tell them, hey, this is you. You are just like us. You are your average or normal. Normal people can become extraordinary, supernatural, if they actually stick to it and train. If they don't, yeah, you're going to end up in one of the other categories and your life is going to be over.
Exactly. And I find interesting how when people like us do make these amazing gains, it always goes back to, oh, well, you must have had good genetics at the start. You can't win with these people.
Yeah, no.
And I think you have a, what's that analogy I was talking about with the cat in the box?
Schrödinger's.
Yeah, can you dive into that a little bit for
Of
my
course,
viewers?
it's something that actually a lot of these ideas I come up with during the video where I'm like, oh man,
Okay.
this makes so much sense. Like it computes in my head. I'm like, wow, this is this. And then when you realize a concept, you somehow become able to apply it to everything because now
Yeah.
it opens your eyes and you see through the deception and you think, oh man, this is what they've been using. And you've said that rightfully. You said they are never wrong or they can never be wrong. It's because it's their big plan. You can actually, it's possible to argue like this. If you're intelligent enough, you can always find a way to talk in a fashion that is going to always lead to your victory in terms of debating or
In an
arguments.
argument sense. Yeah.
It's of course incredibly malevolent to argue like this, and it's actually been it's been researched by Schopenhauer. He wrote a book about that, the art of always being right. In his book, he's not telling you how to be right for the sake of people or yourself. He's just teaching you how to be right for the sake of being right. There's no point in this. But if your entire LARP and your entire thing on YouTube Fitness is to sell products or to say, oh, my way is the right way, then you will apply that and it will function and people will fall for that. So to go back to Schrödinger's genetics, that's one of the tactics they use to always be right. What it means is simple. When you take someone and you discuss their genetics, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as the cat that is in the box and that could potentially be alive or dead. So that's binary options. Before you open the box, you don't know if the cat is alive or dead because the second you open it, a mechanism triggers itself and a reaction creates either the death of the cat or lack thereof, which is the cat just survives. And as I say that, my cat starts to meow. In this situation for us with the genetics, which this means that before you start training, you're the cat. After you're done training, if you are big, then they can go back and say, oh, you are big because of your genetics. And if you're not big, they can say, oh, you are not big because of your genetics. So, regardless of the situation or the outcome, they're correct. It's always genetics. And that's the name of the box. You're the cat, and the box is genetics. The problem is that once you understand this, you realize, wow. So if I, myself in the situation, or you, had never trained, do same people would point at us and say, oh, you have bad genetics
Exactly.
because you're small. But we trained, we came out the box big, so now we have good genetics. So we both have good and bad genetics at the same time, which means we have neither. We have
Yeah.
average genetics and we got great results because we came out the box. Most of these kids will stay in the box because they were told that coming out of it does nothing because they're small.
hmm And I also find interesting two things I'll say about that. The people who propagate this, I have a feeling like it's a way of defending themselves, almost to downplay the effectiveness of their own drugs, because they need an excuse to globally affect others in that way, if that makes sense. And the second thing I'll point out is someone who has really good genetics, you see it fast and it'll happen within a year or two tops. But even within 6 months, these people are putting up crazy numbers. And there are some naturals I follow. One of them is absolutely a genetic freak, deadlifting over 700 pounds, and he's younger than me. And the guy is very smart. He produces great content, but I know that he has better genetics. And that's very evident by looking at the rate of progress. Even I was asked a question recently about a man named Matthews Latt. This individual was performing world-class feats of strength and weighted calisthenics at 17 years old. How long did he train to get that? A year or two? You have people who can work out for 10 years and not have those numbers. So that's when you actually are a freak. You'll see the progress rapid. But if you come in YouTube fitness, let's say 2020, and you're making videos till 2022, and you don't really have the best physique. And then 2023, you improve a little bit. 2024, okay, a little bit more. Then 2025, wow, you got some muscles. What happened? Oh, you had genetics, good genetics from the start, or you jumped on PEDs. They can't accept the fact that it literally is consistency.
Yeah, and again, man, I'm not going to take notes for the sake of this staying unscripted. I don't want to have my little paper in my hands. But you opened up by saying something that is absolutely correct. You said that, in a sense, it looks like projection on their part. It looks like a
Right.
defense mechanism, and you're right. Because at the end of the day, by them saying that, saying, okay, you're either big off of drugs or genetics, but there's no in between, it justifies their choice. Because they can say, okay, I had to take drugs. I was forced. My hand was forced. A lot of them will say that. You hear that across the board. They say, oh, I couldn't progress anymore. I had reached my natural limit,
Yeah.
so I had to take drugs. And then it takes away their own responsibility because it's insane how far this goes. The day they get sick, they will be able to use that and say, "Well, didn't have a choice. So you can't tell me it's my fault. I have to actually face the consequences of my actions." And the problem is that, as you said, they globalize that because they project. It's
Yeah.
the issue with projection is you're taking your own problems and you're pushing that onto people. And when you're just some random guy, it's fine because you have like what, a wife, you have kids. It's already shitty to do that to the people you love. But when you have an audience, when you have sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, that is when it becomes criminal because you poison their mind with your own insecurity and lies that you feel the need to then just shove into their faces so that they can see the same way you do so that you feel better about yourself.
Exactly.
And we're dealing with that now because, in a sense, we have to correct and repair the damage that these people do.
Yep. And I find it makes it worse when these people are described as real because they can sprinkle in a little bit of lies with majority of truth and the whole message gets interpreted as valid. And in a way, it's, as you said, they're not being accountable for themselves, but they want their audience to believe that as well, that this is in fact the reality of the situation. And I find it interesting too how many of them talk about how they have great genetics, yet when they were natty, didn't really appear that way. So was it the genetics or the drugs? I believe it's simple downplaying, but they're not going to admit that. They're just going to
No,
say, "Oh, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You're not going to look like Ronnie Coleman." All these arguments that in the real world, no one is stupid enough to look at a man like Ronnie and say, "Oh, I'm going to look like him if I take PEDs." So no one's coming from that perspective. It's more so the fact that someone who's been training for 10 years naturally isn't going to look as good as a juice head that's overdosing and has been lifting for 2 to 3 years.
yeah, and the thing with this genetics discussion as well is that genetics, and at least the hormonal profile part of genetics, is an important portion of it. It's not everything. Even if you are low T, you can still make great progress because your T level increase as you train. But if you look at the supraphysiological levels that these people take, you quickly realize that because it's so high compared to the average person, then it cannot be downplayed to that level. You cannot say it's genetics when you replaced an entire portion of your genetic background with injections. Because now, of course, you're going to have a massive advantage. You have a massive surplus of that hormone that in normal levels is just a catalyst for muscle growth, but in supramaximal levels becomes a trigger. You become big of the drugs, and it's the difference between naturals and people who are not natural. For us, we have the test baseline and we make muscles out of that. They do the opposite. They have so much test that regardless of if they train or not, they will get big off of that. And when you tell them that, they retreat because they don't want to have to face that reality. And that's when they downplay. They say, oh, it won't do that much, or even if you took it, you wouldn't be like me. And the problem is that it's impossible to go against that argument because the only way for that to be possible would be to prove them
Exactly.
wrong. And we
Yeah.
don't want to do that.
And I find interesting too how many of these individuals are way bigger than the best natural bodybuilders from the past by a huge margin. And those people probably did have good genetics, or maybe it was average and we just didn't know, they just didn't care. That's possible too. Like, we're never going to know, right? But just to say, if these drugs aren't as good as they claim, how come you have absolute idiots who've been training for not that long? Which, if you look at any natural muscle getting calculator, it's impossible to put on that much size. How come these individuals are surpassing the best of the best old school legends that even guys like us have trouble getting to those physiques, even after working out for 10 plus years? How come they do it so easily while following garbage programs? I think it's because it's the drugs and not your genetics. Your genetics aren't as good as Steve Reeves in most cases.
Yeah, and it's the timeline too that never makes sense, right? It's something that I
Yeah.
always preach. It's tough. It's not impossible, but it's tough to look at a physique and say, okay, that's not natural. For the pro bodybuilders, of course, because they don't look human. But for some of those fake natties, they're right on the brink. So that's what
Yeah.
makes them so dangerous. Is you don't know. They just look too good to be true, but not so much that it's a red flag right off the bat. The red flag, however, shows up when you realize that this guy has been training for 2 years, and now you're like, okay,
Exactly.
you achieved an elite physique that takes the old school bodybuilders 15 plus years of non-stop work, and they're not even in reality close to you. You did it in 2. Impossible. That is when you can tell, and that is when you know for a fact that you're dealing with someone who is a liar.
Right. So, what are some other signs? First of all, I want to get into the topic of the lies of PD users, but right now, what are some signs that you have personally seen? Like, obviously, the simple one is they shrink in the off season. They're
Yeah.
obviously so much weaker. The time frame, as you just pointed out. What are some other key factors you've noticed in these fake natties?
Well, that's a lengthy discussion that starts right now.
That's true.
First off, I think the best way to tell is whether or not they discuss programming. Because anyone who's became big as a natural knows a ton about programming, even if they have never actually intellectualized the concept. For example,
Hmm.
the old school bodybuilders, I'm sure if I showed up like in a time machine and I was like, oh, how about your frequency? They would look at me like, what frequency? But they know. They don't know the
Right.
terms. The semantics are foreign to them, but not the reality of their utilization. They know about volume intensity and all of that stuff. They just don't talk about it that much. They just do it. And many people do that too. I can tell you that there are people who have never visited YouTube Fitness that know about that stuff intuitively because it's the only way to get big as a natural. So if you go to one of these channels and the guy is massive and you're like, okay, what's your take on volume manipulation? This guy is not that. He's on YouTube Fitness. He is in the modern era. He has access to all of that, which means that if his size is real, it comes from that. Because at the end of the day, the crux of muscle building is damage to muscle fibers through volume,
Exactly.
intensity, frequency. So if the guy cannot tell you where the muscles come from, there's a problem here, right? It's like math class. Your math teacher will tell
Exactly.
you, okay, you have the answer, show me the formula. If you couldn't show the formula, it's either you cheated or it's a fluke, in which case, in both cases, it's no good. So you get half the points. Same for that. I use the example of, for example, the shoulders. Guy has massive shoulders. You ask, how did you get that? And they either give you an answer like, oh, lateral raises, bro, or they don't know, as if your shoulders would just explode throughout the like from one day to the other. That's a red flag. The guy doesn't even have the ability to tell you where the muscles come from. What are the chances he built this? What are the
Right.
chances he injected instead?
So basically, he can't even speak at the top of his head. And when questioned directly, it's like, lateral raises. And there's never any specific details that actually matter for optimal programming. It's just cookie cutter nonsense that maybe you would have read in a personal trainer's handbook from the 90s. Stuff that doesn't evolve. And the problem, as you point out, is back in the day, we didn't have this information. So the old school bodybuilders did not have to intellectually verbalize it. But now, if you go on YouTube Fitness, you can't not know this stuff. You know what the functions of the muscles are. You know the different heads of the muscle as well. If you want to talk about biasing, but that's a bit more complicated. We have the best compound movements available, tutorial videos. There's so much information that even a complete noob has somewhat more of an idea than back then. Like, I think you would agree that in 2009, there wasn't much stuff out there. You really had to dive deep and even go on the forums. Now you go on YouTube, you have access. If a guy spends a few hours, he should have a decent understanding of certain things. So if he can't even do that, and then you factor in the timeline, and he never talks about programming. It always goes back to nutrition, right? And I'm not going to downplay the importance of that, but I notice with these dudes, it's always vlogs about their recipes, about their protein shake, about their protein butter, cake, whatever they're making, right? And I'm like, you're not talking about progressive overload, volume and intensity manipulation. You're just going to talk about your macronutrients as if that really makes a big difference, assuming that your calories are adequate and you're getting a decent amount of protein, which when we look at the evidence, doesn't even seem to be that much, you know?
It's also the fact that when you push them too much on that and you're like, okay, what about programming, at some point they get upset. So the way they fire back is usually by trying to downplay the importance of programming entirely. And they tell you, oh, it doesn't matter, just go into the gym and train with your instinct. That is the worst advice we can give someone. Train with your instinct. We have numbers and variables. They exist regardless of what you do. You not paying attention to them doesn't work. To go back to the math formula and metaphor, you show up to class, you have an exam, and you're supposed to use a certain formula to solve the equation. If you don't know the formula, you're not going to solve the equation. It's not going to be right. And it doesn't make you any better to not know it. It doesn't make you cool. It just makes you someone who's going to be wrong down the line. Meanwhile, the kid next to you has a cheat sheet, right? He has all of the responses. He gets like an A or whatever. And at the end of the test, he tells you, hey, I didn't need the formula. Well, yeah, because you didn't actually do the equation. It's the same thing for us. So every single time you hear that knee-jerk reaction of, oh, programming doesn't matter, essentially what the guy is saying is training doesn't matter. That's what it boils down to, which then leads to the question, okay, so training doesn't matter, so you didn't get your muscles through training. What is left? You spoke about nutrition and you said we shouldn't downplay it. I think we should, because they hype it up too much. So it's our job to take it down a notch and say, okay, nutrition is very important, especially for overall health. But when it comes to muscular gains, you can eat as long as you want. Your perfect foods and your protein pancakes, whatever, won't make you big. Because the muscle fiber damage is not caused by you eating yogurts. It's caused by the exercise. The food just feeds that. So channels that focus entirely on nutrition tend to have something to hide.
Well, I notice them a lot are the aesthetic bras. They're lacking size and they're weak. Most of them can't bench a decent amount. Not that you have to, but just to say they look good under certain lighting conditions. And most of the time, they're like intermediate lifters, the natty ones anyway. And I see them tracking every little facet of nutrition, like perfectly to the letter. But then you look at the workout and there's so many areas that you can point out to and say, this is not right. You can do better on this. Yet their nutrition is literally dialed in perfectly. And the only time I had to do that was for getting to single digit. My entire lifting career, I've never had to be that precise because you don't need to. And I'm sure the natural bodybuilders back then didn't do that either, especially if you plan on rocking a fluffier state, which is often discouraged in this game. When in fact, I would say pretty much all naturals will feel best at between maybe 10 to 15% body fat or 12 to 15. Doesn't have to be 8 to 9. That's probably the worst possible state to be in.
Yeah, and when it comes to this entire thing with nutrition, as you pointed out too, the issue when you focus so much on that is that it occupies your thoughts, because you count calories, you count macros, and then there's this new anabolic food, so you're excited to try that. This excitement should be reserved for training.
Exactly.
But when you just transfer that onto diet, well, now you have your new game. It's just diet. And it's the reason why these people are what is called forever intermediates. They never go beyond that stage. Although I must say, and maybe it's something that we're going to expand on, that to standards of novice intermediate, I don't really like what they've done to YouTube Fitness.
Right.
But that's a different discussion. But for these people, they have decent physiques, but as you said, they're small. And the problem is that this is not the name of the game. You should aim to get bigger with a good physique. So the overall package should just grow every year. They stay with the same physique for years. And the problem is that they don't seem to understand that there is an issue with this. It's not normal to look exactly the same that you did 2 years ago, even if you looked good. If you want to maintain, by all means do it. But if you want to progress and evolve, at some point you should realize, okay, maybe me just focusing on nutrition is not enough. Maybe I should up my training. But they never do. because there are stars or the people that they love, the aesthetic bras with their channels, never tell them to do that. They tell them, hey, no, just focus on the diet. Look at my vlogs. That's all I do. It's diet. So just do that and you'll be like me. But they never.
Yeah. Well, just to say, I've been preaching the bear mode philosophy for years now, and I've always ate a lot of food. I have a big appetite, and I've been in the 180s multiple times. The only reason why I got a 405 bench is because I learned more about programming. That's it. It's not because I ate more. I've been eating the same for years. And if you're in a surplus, there's not much more you can do other than optimize your volume, your intensity, your exercise selection, being specific to your weaknesses. That's what it takes. And it's as you pointed out, these individuals don't do that. They are focusing on all the wrong things. And then when they don't get results, I see this all the time. Oh, I hit my natural limit, but you didn't. As a matter of fact, I can say that this might be bold of me, but I don't think there's anybody in YouTube fitness that hit their natural limit. Because for one, it probably doesn't exist, as you like to say in your videos. But secondly, you didn't try everything programming wise. Okay, did you read this book on periodization? Have you heard this guy's perspective on biomechanics? Have you tried to broaden your perspective beyond the common YouTube channels? And 9 out of 10 times, that's never the case. And what they interpret as a natural limit is nothing more than the plateau, because your progress will slow down at some point. And although your physique will look relatively similar year to year, there should be some improvements. The measurements will prove that, the tightness of your clothes, and the numbers reflected as well. Whether you train for strength or not, we still got to talk about progressive overload, right? And that doesn't mean you're doing a bunch of one or maxes and triples, but I'm sorry, if your barbell curl is at 100 pounds for 3 sets of 6 and you're still doing that at the end of the year, well, it's because you should work on your programming and probably get it to 10 reps, and that'll be reflected in your bicep size. So I definitely agree with you that they're not focusing on what actually matters, and that's why all these vlogs and nutrition segments are so popular. The programming isn't as sexy.
Yeah, it's not. It truly isn't, right? Just because it's math. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm terrible at math. Some of my most traumatic experiences in school were involving math. It's the area of just academics that I've spent the most efforts on, and I'm the worst at. Like, I can tell you that when I was doing my master's, dude, it's insane. When I was doing my master's, I took a 700 level stat class. I spent like the first 2 classes thinking, okay, I can do this. You can do this. Third class, I was like, I can't. Like this escapes me. Sometimes things escape you. The problem is that programming is not that, right? You won't be like me where I showed up and my teacher was a Korean genius who was just covering the board with equations, looking at me like, you get this, right? And I was like, no, I don't, because you are a genius and I'm not. In this case, programming is basic. It's basic math. Everyone can do it. It's
elementary level.
Everyone's a kid could program in reality. Like 3rd grade, you can program. It doesn't involve anything special. But I must say that I think it's part of the appeal. I think that aesthetic channels keep their subscribers dumb on purpose because it's comfortable to be dumb, because you don't have to make any efforts, or not even efforts, but just step outside your comfort zone. Start looking at numbers a little bit. Don't panic, it's fine, but understand that your program is only numbers. It's all we do. The weight you lift, the reps you do, the number of days you train, all of that is numbers. You can do this and refuse to pay attention, but the numbers are still there. So if you don't control the numbers control you. And now you don't make any results. And sadly, you also don't evolve intellectually. I have a lot of my subscribers who are like this, I'm going to be honest, where I say certain things and they're like, okay, I think you're right. And that speaks to me, but it also makes me uncomfortable because I don't know it yet. And it makes me think I'm dumb. You're not dumb. I just have years ahead of you where I learned that stuff and now I pass it down to you. When your teacher tells you, okay, this is what happened during the French Revolution, you don't get upset because you don't know it. You have to learn at some point. It's something we all went through. You just have to suffer through it. But if you stay on channels that never challenge you and always keep you in that comfortable zone, you'll never grow.
It's true. When you watch informative videos, there should be that click in your head that's like, oh, I don't quite know this or fully understand it, but I want to learn more. And then you start to maybe check out other guys who are speaking about the same thing, or you devour every video that person has to offer. And you might have to rewatch it a few times, go backwards in the video, and until it finally registers in your brain that oh, this makes sense. You could recite it to someone. And that's when you can speak it aloud. And then when you apply it in the gym as well and actually reap the rewards from that. So that's why it's important to have a community of like-minded individuals who talk about programming, because it's just a beneficial feedback loop that helps everybody. Like I know a lot of the old school guys before YouTube Fitness, they followed the principles of Charles Poliquin, right? He was the original influencer per se. And you see all these older guys, they're in their 40s, they're all able to recite his arguments perfectly. None of these people know each other. They're from different states, different countries, whatnot, but they all have that info because they all looked up to him and they studied his work. And it doesn't, you don't have to be obsessed like us, but challenging your mind and not settling for just basic content is very helpful, especially if you accept the fact that the natural game is going to be long term and very difficult, because it only gets harder the more time you put into this. The gains are slower. You have to get smarter with your programming. It's not that you just got to eat more, bro. Sure, you can, but 9 out of 10 times it's going to be the refinement of the details. It's not just about the big picture anymore.
Yeah, and I think that anyone watching this and hearing these words should also tell themselves that they deserve better. You deserve a better quality of content than what you've been fed, which is all of these stupid vlogs. You deserve to be spoken to as an intelligent adult and someone who has the ability to develop their mind and grow. Because if that never happens, you're going to be the same in 5 years, and it's not what we want. The dumbing down of YouTube fitness is a big problem. And as you've said, the informative videos combat that because they challenge you, they make you think, and thinking is what it takes. If we end up going extinct, which, knocking on wood, doesn't happen, the problem is that we're going to be left with all of the rest, and the rest has never been able to produce anything good. You made that point with the old, like, meathead bodybuilders who know everything by heart, like they can recite it to you. Even if that knowledge is bad, the fact that it was able to be passed down to them shows that programming in itself, in nature, has more of a potential to create big, strong, and endurant lifters than nutrition. Because nutrition is more of a case-by-case thing. I fully believe that. I think that you have your own genetic makeup, and it's going to be a game of exploration. You're going to see what works for you, etc. Training is the same to an extent, but there's more transferability to training, where if I know programming, I can pass it down to you. It won't be 100%. Okay, it's not a carryover to 1-to-1, but it might be 0.8-to-1. Nutrition is 0.1-to-1. So this is why most of the transmission of knowledge should be about programming and never nutrition. And you made that point too, the knowledge transforms itself. I give it to you, you tweak it, okay, you don't take it as such, you see what works for you, and boom, just like that, you have new knowledge that you can pass down to people, and it refines itself. So in a sense, it's like, in French is what we call un tamis. But when you're looking for gold and you pass sand through it so that you get the nugget of gold. This is what we do with programming. It narrows itself down. We're becoming more precise with the years, more accurate. Nutrition has never done that. Nutrition, if anything, is doing the opposite. It starts small and now it's just broad, and you tell people, oh, this diet works for everyone. Well, no, it doesn't. We need to narrow it down.
Yeah, I feel like with nutrition, it's mostly evidence that comes out once in a blue moon. You'll see a meta-analysis, and then some rare individuals will discuss it, but no one really gives them the credit they deserve. And it's just like, it's not that complicated. Whereas programming, as you said, refines itself over time. And the information only gets better if you're willing to talk about all perspectives. Like, just to say, in 2016, everyone was discussing yoke training and unconventional lifts, right? And people started picking that apart and offering their own perspective on it. And it's transformed now into kind of like a hybrid form, in the sense that lifters aren't doing rack pulls above the knee anymore, but they might still be doing block pulls because they recognize that there's a way to stretch overload. They might favor RDLs instead of good mornings. And that evolves with the culture. It doesn't just require studies on that level, whereas nutrition is just, there's only so much you can discuss. Like, we know which diets reverse heart disease, for one. We know what it takes to get contest lean. There's only so many recipes, only so many supplements. There's really not many breakthroughs coming out, whereas programming has a lot more potential. And even when I look at some of the popular channels right now, like Renaissance Periodization, he's talking about stimulus to fatigue. And a few years ago, people had no clue what that was. And I find that was an absolute game changer. Now biomechanics, people are talking about as well, like N1 education, the biasing of different muscles. Back then, people thought that you couldn't do that. And, it comes down to just having a higher standard for knowledge and education.
Yeah, which is, some people would fire back and tell you that's not what YouTube Fitness is for. Like, it's supposed to be a place with meatheads who do curls and grunt. Well, we used to have that. If you remember, when it got started, bodybuilding was only that. And it's actually a subject that I can't wait to breach on my channel, because I have a big video playing on the topic. But I have to give props to powerlifters for bringing the light to YouTube Fitness, because bodybuilding was a shit show. It was a circus. It was insane, the things that people who followed the sport had to put up through. The level of influencers was just down the drain. And it took powerlifters to come and say, okay, we have those things for you. It's called programming and variables. Would you like some? And some people were like, oh, interesting. So we're moving from a state of no knowledge whatsoever to some level of it. And those who made the jump made the right choice. Right? They went from the sinking boat to the one that is afloat nowadays and healthy and still going strong. And that is, in reality, what saved some of natural bodybuilding. Some good physiques were built with these methods, even though they were not optimal for bodybuilding. Exactly. They were just programming based.
Yeah, it comes down to establishing the base and making you realize that it is important to formally organize your training and with some concepts, right? And it was the same for me. I was able to finally work with percentages, and you see the numbers going up. It's really cool, right? Then your progress slows down, and I feel like that's when you start to reevaluate what you're in it for. Oh, do I actually care about the big three? Do I really want a 600-pound deadlift? Is that actually my goal? And then you bring it back to, no, I got in this for size, and powerlifting was a tool that I enjoyed. It was a phase. It taught me about programming, but now I can use that knowledge and bring it back to bodybuilding. And some of these principles remain universal in the sense that proper periodization or just proper programming in general is applicable to many sports. So if you do weighted calisthenics, now you can use the methods you learned from powerlifting to improve your weighted chin up. If you like some of the compound movements that were rather simplistic, like your knee flexion based exercises and your hip hinges, now you can get big legs from that instead of investing in all these machines and sticking to less productive movements. So you get really dialed in on the basics, the exercises that have stood the test of time, including for the movements that were for the old school bodybuilders, and then the understanding of just program refinement in general gets you these gains.
Yeah, and it's bodybuilding returning to the promised land in reality, because you said it. We always did that. Natural bodybuilders, that's what they used to do. They got big off of that. They didn't get big off of single leg presses. They got big off of basic knee flexions. And we lost that at some point, thanks to pro bodybuilding, that completely polluted the discussion and YouTube Fitness. And when powerlifters came back and gave it back to us, it was like, okay, this is familiar, right? I know this. It's La Madeleine de Proust all over again. This feels familiar to me. It does, because it was what we always did and what worked back then. And if it worked back then, it worked now. But in the meanwhile, people like you and I myself, sort of were told that we're now powerlifters because we espoused our methods.
Yeah,
and then at
exactly.
some point, there's some pressure with it too, but it's not just bad for us, it's bad for powerlifting too, because even powerlifting was like, we're seeing an influx in people who try to skew the sport.
Yeah.
But the sport is not to be skewed. It's perfect as it is. It's like, it's clear. It's what it makes it so appealing. It's clear. You have numbers, you have 3 lifts, okay? But we don't all like that. Like, for me, I like it from an hobbyist perspective. I love watching powerlifters do their thing, but it's not for me. I don't want to do that myself. Strength for me has no appeal. So why do I have to abide by their methods just because they were the ones to bring back compound movements or bring back programming? Well, we don't. It's something that I want to preach to. We are now building the proper methods for bodybuilding using methods we always used. We're not powerlifters.
Yeah, it was always there, and there should not be a pressure to compete in powerlifting, or even feel bad for not putting up some of those numbers. If you don't care about it, why do you now get ultra specific in that way? Because this is what I've noted over the years, is that people who only cared about aesthetics and bodybuilding now go full on powerlifting mode, and maybe now they're not even training their biceps anymore. They just get so dialed in with the big three programming. They're running systems that they honestly would have never run in the past. And it's almost like they deluded themselves to thinking, yeah, I care more about powerlifting now. But really, do you? And I think by bringing it back to what the old school greats did, like if you read some of the articles, they talked about programming big time. And many bodybuilders actually did compete in strength sports. I read this book, and there was overhead press competitions held because the bench didn't even exist. And you had natural guys in the 160s overhead pressing over 2 plates. This was a long time ago. And then you had the guys in the 180s that were overhead pressing over 250 pounds. So standardization was always there, but not just for the big three. And the bodybuilders they didn't call themselves OHP athletes. It was just, okay, we're big, let's demonstrate our performance. And it was just a side effect of having all this mass.
Exactly. This focus on powerlifting has also led people to just laser focus on certain lifts, which are great lifts by all means, but then you realize also that they don't cover the entire body.
Exactly.
And that has led to people with unbalanced physiques in reality, because I don't think it's an insult to say that powerlifters have unbalanced physiques. They have massive quads, massive glutes, big chest, big shoulders, big upper backs and lower backs. But then you look at the arms, they're small compared to the rest. And the arms are sort of what makes the bodybuilder, right? It's very important to have developed upper arms. It's important to have developed calves, all of these little muscles that powerlifters will tell you, oh, it's useless because it's not a main mover. Well, yeah, it's useless for you. I agree that obsessing over the biceps or the rear delts is completely useless for a powerlifter. You only use it as an accessory movement to get bigger benches or whatever. But for us, it's the name of the game. We only train muscles, not lifts. So for us, it's important. You better isolate these muscles, because if you don't, you're going to end up with a physique that might not be what you want.
Yeah, and that's what happens with a lot of minimalist programs. I know you made a video talking about minimalism versus maximalism and how you want to have that middle ground. I feel like powerlifting has, in many ways, gone to the extreme of minimalism if we're talking about physique development. And the truth is, if you're only specializing the big three, you probably are leaving gains on the table hypertrophy wise, especially those guys who don't isolate the arms. You like to call it the spider physique.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, too, just to reiterate on that, it's not an attack towards
It's not an
powerlifting,
attack.
right?
Yeah.
Because the way you look in powerlifting doesn't matter. The way you perform matters. And at the end of the day, spider physique compared to what the average male looks like is still good, because you'll still be big.
Yeah.
But it's not a look that works for bodybuilders. It just simply doesn't function. But I know many people who end up with a spider physique and are like, okay, what happened to me? This is not what I wanted. Well, what happened is you followed methods that
Yeah.
gave you results that could have been expected. You should have known that all of these squats were not going to grow your arms, but nowhere in your brain did that compute. And I'm not attacking people, because I was the same. For me, I've been a curl bro since day one. So my arms were always
Right.
either the same size or bigger than the rest of my physique, and they still are. But for the rest, for example, my lats, for years I did deadlifts thinking it grew the lats, because that's what people told me in the minimalistic spheres. They were like, oh, no, there's no need for chin-ups or whatever, just do deadlifts. Well, good, I did deadlifts, and then I looked like a fridge, because I had massive erectors, I had massive rhomboids, but no
Yeah.
lats. So I was like this, and I ended up thinking, and that's when the discussion with genetics comes back on the table, that I had just had bad lats genetics. And then I started doing pull-ups every day, and my lats exploded in size. And I realized, hey, I actually have decent genetics.
Yeah. And that's what the old school bodybuilders all preached. If you watch like Leroy Colbert, he used to talk about how they all did weighted pull-ups to get a big back, which is pretty awesome. And that, luckily for me, you start off as a curl bro. I was a pull-up bro, because I started off with calisthenics and I did a crazy amount. And before I even started lifting, I already had a V taper as a result. And I remember years later, I ended up dropping them, and my back wasn't really getting that much wider. My upper back continued to get thicker, the spinal erectors, all that, but the width wasn't where it should have been. And it's only when I completely dropped my pulling, which I'm not going to recommend, by the way, but just to say, when I dropped the hip hinges and did exclusively weighted pull-ups, like full-on specialization, that's when I started to get my lat gains again. So now I combine both. But if I would have just lived in that minimalist ideology of, oh, just raise your deadlift, the lats help to stabilize their, the way to stretch, all that, that's great, but it's missing an important compound movement, one that's always been there.
Yeah, and with minimalism too, what's interesting is that you could think that it's just one bubble, right? It's that one group of minimalists, but no, there's a plethora of them. They just do different things. So you have the minimalist powerlifters, you have the minimalist calisthenic athletes,
Exactly.
and all of these guys. The problem that they have is that it might work for them for their performance in their sport, but when it comes to physique, it simply doesn't. Because if minimalism works for the strength athlete, then we could compare it as like an apartment unit, right? You have your apartment and that's all you need. Bodybuilding is more of a house, right? It's bigger, there's more space. It's less concentrated. You don't have as much stuff in the same space. It's more diffuse, right? Or less focused. But that's sort of the way it should be with the sport. You should have more in your program. It should look a little bit more messy. I think it's the thing too where powerlifters are especially good at. They're very precise. It's like they're surgeons. Their programs are like very clear because they're centered around 3 lifts. As a bodybuilder, I have what, 15 lifts, 16 lifts? So of course my program is going to be more maximalized, but I have to. I don't have a choice because I have a ton of muscles.
Exactly. And some of the movements that you do for hypertrophy, like it might be variations of the big three. I personally prefer Romanian deadlifts than conventional deadlifts if we're talking about pure hypertrophy training. I don't know how you feel about that, but just to say, like, you don't have to be married to competition standards because you don't compete. And even when they talk about how you shouldn't use straps, I always laugh because you can get more even back development. Just to say, if you're doing double over straps, you're not going to be limited by your grip in any type of way, which is not why we do deadlifts. It's a hip hinge. You're trying to load the muscles that control hip extension. Like, why? I feel like many people are disconnected with why they do the exercise. Like, are you trying to get stronger at the movement because you're displaying amazing numbers, or are you trying to use it to induce muscle growth? And if so, what are the programming implications? Like, someone who's doing deadlifts for size isn't just going to come in and hit 1 rep maxes. You could, if that's your goal as a strength athlete, max effort method, but you'll probably get better gains sticking to the 5 to 10 rep range, just to say.
Yeah, and with that, and also when you realize that minimalism also leads to just forgetting things that are important because you scope down on that tiny portion, but you don't see that you're actually zooming down on something that's massive and you just miss the point. So you end up doing lifts, as you say, and you don't really even know why. How many people do conventional deadlifts when it's not suitable for their biomechanics? It doesn't even feel good. They regress all the time, or they're plateauing, and they're like, they keep doing it, and you ask them why, and they say, well, it's a powerlifting standard. You don't powerlift. Why are you following standards of sports that don't really matter to you? This leads you nowhere. You just spin your wheels nonstop.
Exactly. And then some people are extremists in saying that the straight bar is the only thing that matters. If you use a trap bar, your deadlifts don't count. And many other weird arguments like that. Or if you do a touch and go bench, that's unacceptable. All of your presses must be paused. Like, I get that when it comes down to standardization, but if someone is just trying to get big, there's many ways to skin a cat, and I think that's what needs to be emphasized. There's a lot more nuance in bodybuilding. It doesn't have to be ultra specific. It's honestly the most general thing you could think of, and that's what makes it more. That's what makes it so beautiful in a sense. The fact that we have that flexibility to customize it and work on muscle groups that we want to develop. Like, we have different ideals. I talk about bear mode, and you have the berserker physique, right? Those are
Yep.
different expressions of hypertrophy training, and the way you train is going to be completely different to get that look.
Yeah, and it also leads to what we discussed earlier, where you have powerlifting that is so rigid, some would even call it frigid, and then you have bodybuilding. They're like this because it works for them, right? They can stick with those three lifts. But then when you see that same mindset through minimalism being applied to bodybuilding, it leads to ridiculous things like people saying, as you said, oh, you can only lift like this. And the answer to that is why? Explain to me why. Or you
Yeah.
lift doesn't count. Who is counting? I don't see a judge in my home gym. Do you see one? It's not a powerlifting meet. It's for hypertrophy's sake. So these people try to pretty much sum up lifting to powerlifting. And I have found, that's my personal opinion, that every time I meet a powerlifter that's like this, that's very always in the reduction and trying to make other people feel bad, they tend to be shitty powerlifters. So they don't have great numbers. They never accomplish anything. And they're also bad teachers because it's tough to pass down knowledge when you're constantly refusing knowledge, right? We've
Yep.
expressed that. We expand our knowledge. Yes, we scope down, we get rid of the stuff that doesn't work, but it doesn't mean that we get rid of 99%. That's minimalism that goes rampant, that then leads to bad results, because most powerlifters would tell you that if you minimalize your program too much, you're leaving gains on the table because you're reducing your options. It's as simple as that. Like, look at the rep ranges. I don't know a single world record powerlifter who only trains with one rep range. There's not one that only does a 5x5. They all have a ton of tools in their arsenal. They have like maybe 5. Bodybuilders need 15. Okay, we're different. We live in different buildings. It's fine to have different lifestyles.
Yeah, I think you made a great point that those who are really strong and have that base established, that are competing at an elite level, aren't talking shit. It's really the amateur powerlifters. Usually they tend to be lightweights as well, but I'm not going to say that's related. But just to say, it's people who haven't gone that far in the sport, or if they do compete, they're good, but not the best. Those who are really in their own lane, they don't have time to worry about all this craziness on social media. And most of the time, they don't even have a YouTube channel, uh, which is usually you'll get their information through an interview of some kind, right? Or people will talk about their methods, but it's always I'm giving credit. It's not talking to the person one on one, you know? The powerlifters who didn't make it that far are the most judgmental in most cases, and they often are the biggest culprits of minimalism because the world record holders certainly aren't trained that way. There's a difference between simplistic versus minimalist. The program doesn't have to be overly complex, but there will be some variety that goes beyond some of what you see here on YouTube Fitness. So I think at the end of the day, people need to bring it back to respect and just recognize that everyone has their own physique goals and stop trying to pull everyone in your own camp, because that just divides people more and more and creates anger across the groups.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to do with my berserker physique. You know, when I made it, I didn't say, okay, this is the physique, and if you don't like it, screw you. I was like, no, this is a fringe physique that involves smaller shoulders and smaller chest. This goes against everything pro bodybuilding has been doing. Like, everyone wants 3D delts. I don't want that. Like, if you could give it to me,
You
I
wouldn't
would be
take.
mad at you. I'd be like, thank you for ruining my physique, Alex,
Yeah.
because that's not my goal. And I said that, expressed that, because I want people to be able to be true to themselves. You know what you want to look like. You deep down, you know it.
That's a
YouTube
fact.
Fitness is telling you, oh, look like this or like that. You might let that supersede what you want, but it's not going to make you happy. You're going to just succumb to social pressure. And at the end of the day, it makes people bitter. And I can tell you that a lot of these powerlifters are people like that. They don't care about powerlifting. If they did, they would love the sport enough to understand that there is options and that they all are valid. They reduce everything because they were forced and shoehorned into powerlifting. They don't fit in. Maybe they're into aesthetics or calisthenics, but they were told that this is the only way. And now they're just looking around and thinking, I'm going to project that onto people because it doesn't feel good when I keep it inside me. And it's not a good thing. As you said, like the top
Man.
guys, and we know a lot of them on YouTube Fitness, they're chill dudes. Like, the only moment where they'll get upset at you is if they feel like you're messing with their sport or you're trying to modify things that don't need to be modified, then they attack. But that's normal. It's a normal reaction. I think it boils down to what powerlifting is compared to bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is a visual sport, but in reality, it's more of an art. Powerlifting is a sport. Like, for the people who still say, the normies that say that powerlifting is not a sport, wrong. It's based on performance. The people who
Exactly.
do powerlifting are athletes. It's a sport. But it then leads also to the fact that to be a good powerlifter, you have to do something. You can't just say, oh, I have a big bench. Okay, show me, right? If you have a big chest, you have a big chest. So the people that wanted, in a sense, to be bodybuilder but were forced to be powerlifters still exist in the visual, because in reality, they're bodybuilders. So they tell you, oh, you have to do this or that because you can see it with your eyes and I can judge it. Real powerlifters just say, hey, you get big numbers, whatever your method is, just it's good. It's performance based.
You could kind of tell by the way they talk. There's that hint that hypertrophy is in fact important to them, you know? Whereas the real all-in powerlifters, they rarely ever talk about that. Like they understand the importance of it for raising performance, but when you look at the way they look, oftentimes it's pretty evident that they don't give a they care about performance, you know, and bodybuilding is more than that.
And there's freedom in that too, to be able to just say, this is my pursuit and this is what I do. Because then you can just push the rest aside and not be so bothered by it. And it's a message that I think bodybuilders need to embrace as well. Strength is important for us because it's a way for us to grow our muscles, but it starts and ends there. Like if you start using strength as a way to feel better about yourself, well, even powerlifters don't do that, right? They don't do that because they have like a problem with their ego or whatever. It's a way to compete. So we need to respect strength from both sides, right?
Exactly.
And in that sense, this means that for bodybuilders, it is the possibility of saying, hey, I don't care about strength. Just like a bodybuilder would say, hey, a powerlifter would say, hey, I don't care about size. We're different and similar in that aspect.
Exactly. So then one thing I want to ask you on is, what is the berserker physique? Because you mentioned briefly, but I remember in one of your videos you're talking about how, yeah, I don't want my shoulders to get too big because I need the illusion of the arms to pop out more. And I saw some comments like, yo, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So could you explain that a little bit? Because I understand it, you know, as someone who talks about the outer extremities of the body, you could make your physique look different through specific specialization. So what is the berserker specialization?
So first off, it stems from berserk. For the people who are completely new to this and it's the first time they heard that, berserk is a manga written by Kentaro Miura, rest in peace, who is, to me, one of the most amazing pieces of art that has ever been created. You need to do yourself the great service of exploring it. I'm not going to go into details, but that's where it comes from, because the main character has a berserker physique. And so what it looks like is you have extremely big arms. So especially the biceps and the long head of the triceps need to be blown out of proportions. The shoulders need to be big, but not bigger than the upper arm. That's the important part. Never bigger, because if it's bigger, it either creates an illusion of continuity between the shoulder and the upper arm, so it looks like a tube, quote unquote, a massive one, but it doesn't give you the look you want. You want a round shoulder and a bigger, rounder upper arm that makes it look even more massive, if possible. Then you have big forearms as well. It's very important. The chest needs to be developed, but not too much, because they're connected with the shoulders, so you need them to be sort of in harmony with one another. The core needs to be extremely developed, not necessarily shredded, but big. You need to have those bulging abs as much as possible. Doesn't require you to be low body fat, right? If you train the muscle, even with fat on it, you'll have big abs. I'm the perfect representation of that. Then the waist needs to be medium to large. Doesn't need to have a very narrow waist. It's not a physique that is centered around the V taper, because for once I have a 36 inches waist. So a V taper for me, I have one, but it's not impressive at all. And then the legs, this is the part that is in a sense debatable, because guts in berserk doesn't have big legs. My vision of the berserker physique is tree trunks. Like we're talking as big as you can get them, as meaty as possible, which also means that you're going to have to work on the upper body. Because if they start overpowering the upper body, it's going to look bad. You're going to get what I call the frog physique, where you have this massive quad and nothing else. So that's pretty much the bulk of your focus. And then, of course, the upper back. The upper back needs to be huge.
Right.
Needs to be yoked. So big traps. Focus on the real delts. Something that, even though I don't want 3D delts, I have realized with time that even if you develop the real delt to a great extent, it only gives you the shape, not the size. So you end up with really good looking delts, but they're not massive by any means. And then, yeah, the lats need to be big, the rhomboids need to be big. You end up thick, in a sense. That's sort of the base of the physique.
So it's a thickness and limb dominant physique, kind of basically the opposite of the spider physique.
Exactly. And for the question of the shoulders, as you said, people are like confused. Okay, first off, people are confused because big shoulders are a staple of pro bodybuilding. Because of the drug use, by the way, it's not their training. It's just that there's a lot of androgen receptors in the zone.
Well, just to cut you off real quick, that's the one area when naturals get shredded, they don't have that crazy 3D pop, even though you would think they do. That and the upper chest tend to shrink down quite a bit. So when you see these guys, their delt is coming outwards, like way past the triceps. Well, it's because of the drugs. It's not due to superior training methods or all the side raises they do.
Yeah, and you point out something interesting here. I've found that people who take steroids tend to have a very high ability to retain adipose tissue, fat, and especially intramuscular fat in the shoulders. So even when they cut down, it still has that look like someone like put a straw in it and blew. This is where it comes from. Naturals don't get that. With naturals, you can get striations at the wazoo as much as you want. You can have big shoulders, round shoulders, but it's the aesthetic appeal of it that is going to change. It's not going to be like a balloon.
Like
That's not
Frieza,
possible for naturals. Exactly. Like this look, and I'm not saying it looks bad. I don't want it for myself, but this is a dead giveaway also of people who take steroids. But then you take that, it becomes a standard, and when you come out and you say, "Oh, I don't want that," people are confused because they want that. Can they achieve that? That's a different question altogether. But for me, I even had people tell me, "Oh, you're lying." Like deep down,
like you're
you want
coping. You don't want big shoulders.
exactly. Like in reality, you want big shoulders, but you can't have them. So you're trying to just invent this, like as if I would spend my time inventing a physique just to make up for the fact that I can't have big shoulders. To me, it's ridiculous. And to these people, I say, I will take it even further. I detrain my shoulders on purpose. I want them to shrink. It's not just I don't want them to grow. I want them to lose size. Funny story. Recently, I have a swimming pool. So I was swimming every day. I was doing laps every day because I love swimming.
Okay.
And one day I look at myself in the mirror. I'm like, man, my shoulders are getting a little bit too big because they were starting to round up from all of the swimming I was doing. And I was like, okay, I don't like that. So what I did is I did exactly. I just dropped it. Or if I swim, I did sprints instead. I didn't do resistance or so many laps, and they shrunk down. I'm at a point where I overhead press maybe every 10 days. Maybe. That's my one vertical press. Because I found that if I press more, my shoulders grow too much and it just doesn't work for me. And I think you can attest to that. The shoulder grows much faster than the upper arm. You have more potential in this area for just all of the biomechanical aspects of it. You can press, you can move a ton of weight with it. So for the people who want big shoulders, good news. It's not that hard. Just do your presses and lateral raises. You'll have big shoulders over time, not in 6 months.
Yeah.
But then your upper arm doesn't match that. So that's also the reason why I also keep them small.
They get involved with everything you do. And I believe the shoulder is the biggest muscle in the upper body. So your potential is absolutely insane. What I'm curious in your case is you still overhead press despite wanting your shoulders to remain in the current state and maybe even getting small to a certain extent, especially as your arms continue to grow, right?
Yeah.
So why do you continue to include vertical presses, and how will you prevent further development? And what are some ways of biasing, like being more of an arm dominant lifter?
So first off, with the press thing, for me, I press for two reasons. The number one not being size. The number one is health. Because I've found that nothing helps the health of the rotator cuffs more than vertical presses. I used to be someone who was plagued with shoulder issues because of my benching habits. And I always found that if I skewed it more towards overhead press, not only would I progress more on the bench, but I was less injured. And I still find that to that day. When my shoulders start feeling hiffy or I have an old injury that starts coming back up, I overhead press. After that, my shoulders feel like $1,000,000. The movement pattern is just, it feels very natural and good for me. So I do that for that first reason. Then the second is that even though I don't want big shoulders, I don't want them to become a weak point. That would be a mistake that many people would make. Just stop training them altogether. Well, no, train them less. Just enough to maintain the neurological adaptation aspect of things so that if one day my mind changes and I want big shoulder, I don't start from like pressing 50 pounds. I'll have a base that's already there. So I can stick to relatively low weights, but still do it every 10 days so I can maintain the muscle, I can maintain the function, and it stays in my back pocket. And then for the strategies to get the berserker physique, those bigger upper arms, well, it's simple. You skew your training towards that. Most people don't realize that they have smaller upper arms because their training is designed like this. They have a ton of presses, so their shoulders grow. Then they do like 3 sets of curls. Of course, you have smaller biceps is because you don't curl as much as you press. You want the opposite, you just do the opposite. For me, I do 6 to 12 sets of curls, like of heavy, intense curls a week. I do 3 sets of vertical presses in 10 days.
Right.
This is where the difference comes from.
So you're like like an upper arm specialist in a sense. This is where most of the volume is allocated. Let's say we have a maximum recoverable volume. You're hitting that with the muscles that are most important for the berserker physique. Then those that you're trying to maintain or minimize, you hit the minimum volume that's required.
Yeah, and it's something that, again, programming.
Yeah,
Programming allows you to do that. You
pretty
have
much.
that range. And many people, once they get that there is such a thing as minimal recoverable volume and maximum, understand that this is a range. You don't have to be at the top or the bottom. You can play with it. So
Yeah.
let's say one day one of your muscle becomes more of a priority. You're going to max that out. And since you max that out, you need to make some space in the program for it. So you minimize the rest. And there it is. There's your space.
And that should further be proof that it's not all about genetics. You can change the way you look based off how you overdevelop certain muscles. If you look at some arm wrestlers, they have form development that's equivalent to pro bodybuilders, absolutely massive. But then you look at their upper arm, it's not the biggest. Their chest, no real mass there. Upper back, not the thickest. So because it's so biased on the forms, they're basically small everywhere else. But it's not because they're genetic elites in that department. Unless you make the argument that people who are genetically blessed are more likely to compete in that sport, but that's a different topic altogether. So basically, it should be provable by looking at various athletes of many sports that's not related to bodybuilding that you can skew the whole aesthetic.
Yeah, and what you just said here, I want to come back on because you offer the counter argument I hear a ton, where people tell you, oh, the reason why all of these arm wrestlers have big forearms is because only the best make it and the best have the best genetics, so they get the biggest forearms. That is simply untrue for one reason. You go to an arm wrestling meet and you look at just everyone, not just the top dogs, everyone, they all have big
All of them,
forearms.
yeah.
So it's not just the ones that actually make it that get big forearms. You see that with swimmers as well. Swimmers have very developed shoulders, very developed lats. I swam for a long time when I was a kid. You go to a swimming meet, everyone has that physique. They all have that physique. What do they have in common? Are you going to tell me they all have the same genetics? They all have the same mother, they're all brothers? No, they have the same training. The training creates the physique, not the genetics.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with gymnastic rings. You can hear people saying, "Oh, these gymnasts have big biceps because they're short, and that gives them the illusion of that body, right? And they're going to compete at that level because they're just built to do it, right?" But if you look at a guy who's 6 feet and gets into gymnastics as an adult, doesn't even plan on going to the Olympics, he gets on those rings and those biceps start coming up. Oh, why? Because everything you do is rings turned out. They have to stabilize. It's very arm dominant in pretty much everything you do. So that is the side effect. It's not the other way around like some people seem to believe in hypertrophy context.
Yeah. And it's insane that you're bringing that up because just yesterday I was watching a documentary, a French documentary about rings, and I could send it to you if you wanted. It's a
Okay.
magnificent piece, and they were interviewing some of the best coaches of France who coached l'équipe de France, so the
Okay.
top of the top, like the cream of the crop. And the guy was saying something that stuck with me because it confirmed everything I ever believed. He was like, "Hey, you see that kid over there?" And the kid was doing like some insane flips on the rings, whatever. It was like 5 years ago, no one would have bet a peanut on that kid. Everyone was saying, "Oh, he doesn't have the structure for it. There's no way he's going to become good at it." And now he's top one. Like he's the guy that wins us medals. Why? He kept going at it. And he even said he went as far as saying that there is no such thing as a specific structure to be good at Olympic rings. That's something that most people would say is insane to even hear because you would think that there's an archetype of someone who is going to do well. And the guy was like, no, we get kids that are 8 years old. You cannot say for certain that kid will make it. Even after puberty, when the frame is set, you cannot state that it's not possible. And to go back on the topic of the biceps, in that documentary, every single person had big biceps, upsettingly big, even for someone like me. I was like, they look like bulbs. It's insane. Even the kids, like 8 years old, he had bulging biceps. I was like, you're going to tell me this guy is on steroids or he's a genetic freak? No, he's been on rings ever since he was 4. That's why.
Yeah, and when you look at the specific nature of those movements, everything you do is weighted stretch, and they're actively involved in every position you can think of. So that is going to be the side effect. So I'm curious, do you I think I've seen rings in your background, right? When you're filming. What's your experience been like with them?
Well, first off, I have to give you credit for that because you're the one who put me on rings.
Ah.
Well, I was watching your videos and I was like seeing all of that yoke gymnastic training, and I was thinking,
Yeah.
that looks interesting to me. I'm always, as a bodybuilder, I'm always looking at ways to improve my training. Even if it's out of the box, the more out of the box, the better. I will give everything a try. So I got a pair and I started, and I was like, you know what? That actually feels good. That seems to me like a good investment. It works to stabilize the muscles. I can go deeper on push-ups. I can do inverted rows with different grips. I can even do some pelican curls, all of that
Yeah.
stuff. And I realized one thing too. If we're going to talk about fatigue to stimulus ratio, rings have such an insanely good ratio.
Yep.
They're not, unless you go into insanely advanced variations, they're not that taxing on the tendons. They train them, yes, they improve them, but you will never get tendonitis from them if you just do it regularly enough without too much volume. And then you look also at the fact that you can train your chest, you can train your upper back, you can train your shoulders, you can train your triceps, all of which will recover fast because it's calisthenics. And you realize that it's a tool that everyone should have in their arsenal.
Yeah, it offers so many options. Maybe with the legs, that would be the only exception that you can't get that big, if you ask me. But the whole upper body, it's like having an all-in-one machine, but we're doing movements where the body's moving through space. So you can hit if your back is tired, okay, you don't need a cable row, do an inverted row. And now you can rotate the grips. So whatever feels best on your leverages and joints, you got that. Don't have a multi-grip pull-up bar? Well, the rings give you the flexibility. You want to do push-ups where you're squeezing your pecs together? Well, that's a good replacement instead of getting dumbbells. So it really simplifies the process for home gym owners, and it gives you that, like you said, excellent stimulus fatigue ratio. And I think there was one old school bodybuilder, I don't remember his name. He used to do a lot of ring flies, then off his workout. So he would do the bench press, the dumbbell bench, and then isolate with those. And what's cool is that you still get carryover to your push-ups because it's specific enough. So there's an athletic element to this as well.
And it brings us also back to old school bodybuilding again, where you look at these guys, you would have never come
You
across one
never
of
thought,
them
yeah.
who is going to tell you stuff like, oh, just do this. Like they were jack of all trades in terms of exercises. They did everything that worked. Like you could see one of these guys picking up rocks, because why not? Right? They weren't confined. I think we're lucky, our generation, because we have gyms and we have very advanced equipment. I'm not going to say that this is bad, but it has led people to becoming too dogmatic, right? Or they think only
Yeah.
use this, only use that, and it even feels like the second you touch like a barbell, that's it. You're part of the barbell club, and that's all you can do for the rest of your life. Whereas if you just opened up your eyes and looked around, you can do rings, you can do arm wrestling stuff, you can do compound movements, isolation, dumbbells, body weight, calisthenics. It's
Yeah.
all out there for us, right? It's like a big garden. You get to pick and choose.
Yeah. And I always find it weird when people say, wow, it's like on my channel, I get this a lot. People will say, Alex, it's really unique and interesting how you're able to do weighted pull-ups, uh, bench press, and all these other compound movements. You're strong at all of them, and you have this physique. Like, I don't see guys doing that. And I always find it strange because that should honestly be the norm. I don't find that to be unusual or special in any type of way. Anyone can buy these pieces of equipment and unlock their mind further, get outside of living in the big three exclusively. Like there's so many freaking exercises out there and so many sports that we can just pick and choose. Okay, you like the way arm wrestlers look, forearm wise, take some of their movements. Why not introduce that at the end of your arm day? Like, I think you're 100% correct that things have become way too dogmatic. And the moment we get out of there, we be like water, as Bruce Lee said. That's when training really gets fun and you start to develop the physique that you actually want.
To go back to that, I mean, we spoke about it, but what you just said with Bruce Lee, be like water, that's exactly that. You yourself can be anything you want. It depends on the recipient that you're poured into. For a bodybuilder, it feels like most people have lost sight of what the recipient even is. So they
Right.
don't know what shape they're supposed to take. The answer is there is no shape. You defined what the recipient is going to be like with your goal body, and then you use the methods that work with that. And people who tell you that and they say, oh, it's insane that you can do all of this, as you said, it's supposed to be the norm.
Yeah.
We're all supposed to be like this. We became ultra specialized because of powerlifting, right? They do that because they have to. We don't. Specialization for the bodybuilder is the death of the physique, because you're going, unless you want to go for the
Like,
crap
yeah,
physique and you just
exactly.
want big biceps. But how many people just want big biceps? I think I have one subscriber who told me I just want big. He told me I just want big traps and big calves. I was like, interesting. I don't know what you're going to look like. Go at it if that's what you want. Good for
Okay.
you. But most people, they want a package. They want everything developed to an extent or another. How do you do
Exactly.
that? You do everything.
Yeah. Do everything, and like you said, if you want to downgrade the muscular development on some areas, not hit your limit, quote unquote, on that, so be it. Like I think most gym bros don't really want tree trunk legs, if I'm being honest. I know you like it, and that's fantastic. But I think most of them would probably be happy with like 24-inch aesthetic legs that look like Frank Zane, you know? But, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to cap your squat at 405 instead of 500, talking about bodybuilding rep ranges here, you go ahead and do that. But know that you are capable of more. So whenever you choose to specialize, uh, it's pretty much leaving gains on the table on some level, and you never actually hit your limit, you know?
In this aspect, yeah. And for the muscles and what you want to develop or not, it will also become a problem if people looked at what we do, what I do, for example, and think, okay, he has small shoulders either because he has bad genetics or because it's his limit. No, it's a self-imposed limit,
Exactly.
right? That's what freedom is. Freedom is not just I do everything, right? That's what I spoke about when I said minimalism versus the maximized programs. The
Yeah.
program, if you put everything in the program, is that it's not freedom just because you do everything. Freedom is in the restriction that you impose on yourself. So for yourself, for example, you don't like big legs. That's a restriction, right? It's not the opposite of that. You're going to not train as much because you don't want the look. That is perfectly fine. People need to understand that just because you're restricted doesn't mean it's a bad thing. As long as you do it. If someone told you, hey, small legs are better, and you bought that even though you don't believe in it, now that's a problem. Just like
Yeah.
if I kept my legs small, even though, let's be honest, I have a problem with legs. I want my legs to be way too big, right?
Exactly.
We are expressing our identities. That's what it is.
That's exactly what it is. And I think people just need to be real and honest with themselves. Like stop caring so much about what another man thinks about you when in reality they don't care. Because one thing I pointed out in the past is that I see these influencers getting injured, and then you see the subscribers are like, "Oh, wishing you a speedy recovery. We're here for you. We're rooting for you." And slowly the views start to go down. The guy gets less relevant. And now there's the comeback, and he's on his way to reclaiming his former physique. But by then, the audience has already left, and then he just leaves. So the truth is, they never cared about your numbers or physique to begin with. So you wasting all those years was a complete waste of time. When all you had to do was be true to yourself, you would have optimized your program, you would have had the motivation, and you know what? You would have had an audience of like-minded individuals who are on the same page. So accountability is key in this game.
As we say in French, tu mets des coups de pied dans la fourmilière. You're shaking up things that need to be discussed right now because this is so much more than just goal physique, right? It's
Yeah.
the relationship we have with the audience and what we do to them and what they do to us. Because the
Mm-hmm.
problem is that you just expressed that most people who end up pressured into doing things they don't want or get bodies they don't want are pressured by the audience because the audience is like, oh, you should abide by this. So they
Yeah.
do it because they're like, oh my God, if I don't do it, they're going to leave. But by doing that, you're also molding your audience and you teach them, hey, your physique is what people want it to be. So it's a
Right.
toxic back and forth relationship. And honesty is the only way out of that. For me, my subscribers know I have no problem cussing them out. I'll tell them, hey, my physique is my physique. You can say what you want about it. It's not going to change. I'm going to stay the way I am. Yes, I'm not the leanest because that's what I rock. I'm never going to do a cut just to satisfy you. Just like you should never do something to satisfy me. This is where fanboyism comes into play. I am the owner of the channel. I make the videos. It starts and ends there. I'm not your god and you're not my master. We have a relationship that is based on equality. If you're not vibing with that, go find a channel where you can glorify the guy or he
There
can
you
talk
go.
down to you like a little kid or toddler. I'm not going to do that because it's toxic.
Yeah, one of the things I believe you talk about is severing the parasocial relationship. You have to learn to be disconnected to prevent fanboyism from occurring in the first place. But you always come from a place of respect. So you don't be a douchebag or anything, but you're able to like it's not a cult basically.
Yeah, because courts start not just from the dynamic choice of the person who starts it. The court is also the result of the court members. And you see
Yeah.
that too, where if you are interested in that, you research court leaders, they don't start crazy. They start malevolent. They always have in their mind the idea to utilize people, but their madness evolves with time because it's being fed by the court. You see the same thing
Mm.
on YouTube Fitness. You see a guy who starts is honest or sort of relatable, and the more time passes, the
It's
more
true.
glorified he becomes to the point where he becomes a god.
Yeah, like they can't get their head out of their own ass. Their
Yep.
ego has blown up to such a level that they don't even realize they're behaving in that way. And then that's typically when, at some point, like if the cult, well, if the audience doesn't put these people in check, like they just crash hard instantly, and you never hear from these people ever again.
You pointed it out. It's the audience. I mean, the
Yeah,
audience will leave your ass at some point. Like, this is YouTube Fitness, and YouTube Fitness is a reflection of life. Right?
it
Life has a
is.
start and an end. Everyone who has a channel will tell you that if they're honest, they know deep down that every channel has a start, struggles, the grind. You have your golden age where you get your most of your views and subscribers, and eventually the channel dies. Some people, the best out of the best, can make the channel last for a very long time. They can maintain that, but there is an inevitable death at some point. The death can happen much faster if you engage in fanboyism because fanboys are turncoats. They will go on the channel of the next big guy. They will leave you in the dust. And for you and I, we have those people. Even though we try not to have them, they exist. But if
Right.
they leave, they are such a small portion that it's not even noticeable. But if your entire brand is that and you're like the big master, guess what? The day they start to find a better master out there, they're going to leave and it's going to be hundreds of thousands of people. And that is, in a sense, the destiny of all of these guys.
Wow, that's a crazy reality, and it's so true when you look at the state of YouTube fitness because these people just move on from one influencer to the next, right? When in reality, you should have a select few that give you really good information, and the goal should be to move on from maybe even needing them in the first place. Like I don't know if you watch a lot of YouTube fitness in general these days, but I'm sure it's a lot less than when you were younger because you've established yourself, you have the information, and now like the whole point is you're taught so that you can move on. It's as if you're a personal trainer and you're never educating your clients that they always need to leech onto you. They're dependent on you. No, the whole goal should be to almost give your audience a degree in whatever you're speaking about. This way, they eliminate the fanboyism completely while getting scammed over by other guys. And now they know what it takes to build a great physique, and they could bring that back to others if they so choose to.
Exactly. And this is the difference between a clone and someone who is going to have a good life. A clone will just copy paste and download 100% of the personality, knowledge, and experience of the person they watch. And
Yeah,
they just become them. This is something that needs to be avoided at all cost because no one is good enough as a man to be 100% a role model for everyone. That's not possible. You can't be that. And once you realize that, you also realize that for you, the person who watches YouTube Fitness, you cannot let yourself have only one person that you watch. You need a lot of them so that you can have information from all aspects of life, take just what you want, apply it to your life, and then eventually, as you said, you bounce. Like, in a sense, we're like mother ox, like we're taking care of baby chicks. The mother is not just going to just pamper the kid and keep it in the nest for 20 years. At some point, you have to fly, you have to go by yourself. I tell my subscribers all the time, I expect you to watch a lot of my videos at the start, and then when you have formed a solid knowledge base, you're going to have more real life experience. And once you do that, that transfers into actual knowledge, and you go from that. If you watch more YouTube Fitness than you spend training in a week, you're doing something wrong, because you're just constantly living in a virtual reality instead of having your own experiences. Lifting is your own journey. People on channels that have high parasocial grounds tend to live their life through the influencer, which means you never live your real life.
Right. And another consequence of that is paralysis by analysis, because there's just information overload and you never actually do. It's okay, I'm going to take this idea and I understand it now, but let's not apply it. Let's learn something else. And then, oh, that contradicts what I just learned. Where do I go now? And it ends up being this vicious cycle where you're just completely confused. And that often leads to program hopping as well, which seems to be a big issue in beginner lifters, which often results in them staying that way for years. And that's where the whole, oh, I have bad genetics argument comes into play. They never actually dedicate themselves to the craft itself. It was all mental masturbation. And that's why they always look for their new god in YouTube Fitness, because the previous one didn't have the answers, when in reality it was their own doing. All they had to do was get in the trenches and do the work. That's why a lot of these people who don't even use social media are buff, because they're consistent and they're not worrying about all these little factors.
Yeah, you bring up two very important points here. One, the program. Programs are not just, I said in the past that your training is numbers. That is true in a vacuum when you train. But when you take someone else's program, you're taking more than that. It's not just numbers. It's also their identity. Because programming is like writing a novel, right? When you program, there's a part of your persona that you put in the program. And I believe that. And I do program reviews on my channel, and it's interesting because you can truly get into the mindset and the psyche of the person who wrote the program just by looking at the way they do it. So like, my way of programming is not your way of programming. Doesn't mean that one is better. It means that they come from different people. Most novices, if you tell them that, they'll tell you, what? Like, it goes above their head because they never think about that. So they go on the program without realizing that there is a part of the identity of the YouTuber attached, and it has an influence on your own identity. This is why making your own program should be the goal. You start with a program made by someone else because you don't know any better yet. But as you train and you use the program, now you're going to get somewhere. And that leads to your second great point, paralysis by analysis. If you just, I like to use that metaphor, if you just collect programs like Pokemon cards and never actually use them, well, guess what? They're completely worthless, because the program is only good when you do it, because you start understanding things and you think, that doesn't work for me. You skew it, and before you know it, you've learned how to program. And now you're making your own identity, and this is great. This is going to lead you to being independent, as opposed to people who program hop and are always dependent because you program hop on other people's programs.
I think it comes down, that was a great point, by the way. It comes down to using principles, right? Not necessarily having this rigid system that doesn't offer additional options. Like, you have to have an understanding of the program, but don't get married to every facet of it. That's where individual customization comes into play, for not only addressing the muscles that you're trying to target upon, but also like what works for you, what you discovered to be effective over the years. If you pick up a program and it's only an Excel spreadsheet and there's no explanations for anything, the learning experience is essentially you running the program, because there's no information otherwise, right? But I think what's better is maybe not having something that's overly precise like that, but getting into great detail regarding the specifics, like what it means to program off percentages, or why you'd have to do this exercise as opposed to this one. It's not just about following a chart, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And you see that with my opinion with good programs. When I see a good program, it tends to be a program that stands on its own two legs because it understands that you don't need a Bible to come with the program to make it work. If you need that, it's a bad program. The program can be run by anyone, and maybe it's not going to be 100% accurate or good for them, but it's going to be lenient enough and not restrictive that they can make their own experience. It's also the problem I have with a lot of novice programs and that stem from powerlifting. They try to put the novice in that tiny cage, and then they wonder why the novice never actually learns how to fly. Well, because there's not enough space in the cage. You need to give freedom to people. You need to let them make their own choices. If they make their mistake, it's fine. Before you learn how to fly, you need to learn how to fall. It's important. And this correlates with the information that comes with it. Because if you bombard the novice with this and that, and the program needs to be done like this, you make them afraid. You scare them off, and they start thinking that programming is this impenetrable beast and monster, and they never try their hand at it.
I think a lot of people believe that programming is really complex, but when you actually break it down, it's as we discussed earlier today, it's not complicated. Like one thing I was guilty of in the past was not simplifying concurrent periodization enough. I got a little bit too wordy with it, when in reality, it could be simplified to you have a volume day and an intensity day, and you rotate exercises when you plateau, or if you feel little aches coming in. It could be dumbed down to that. Basically, it's not.
You can keep on your lap if you.
All right, I'm gonna keep it right here because she doesn't want to leave. You explain the details, right? You get a little bit specific, but then when you start giving examples on how simple it actually is, and you show what the workouts look like, you realize I don't even need to follow an exact program if I understand the principles. Like with what I promote, just looking at the workout videos should tell you how to do it yourself. And it's not that you copy it, you just understand it. It's more so like the practical application of those formal terms in a way that doesn't make your brain go crazy, if that makes sense.
It boils down to applying versus just theory, right? Because what you said sounds good until you try to actually apply it and your subscribers don't like it because they have been so used to getting like lists, like laundry lists of instructions. So their natural reaction is saying, oh, I'm going to mess up. Well, good. Please do mess up and make your own mistakes and learn from it. You describe that with your own struggles with certain methods that you realize you were too wordy with. I'm the same with evolving rep ranges. I have a tendency to try and make it too much of an intellectual HRX concept, when in reality it's so stupid and easy to get. It's like, instead of doing 5 reps, you're going to do 4 to 6 reps.
Exactly.
That's a range. It's going to allow you to progress over time. That's it. I just summed it up. You don't need to learn more. But I have an entire playlist on the thing. Why? Because in every single concept, there's the simple application that everyone can do. And then the more you learn, the more complex it becomes. I could make you 50 videos about lizards. Most people, they see a lizard, they think it's a lizard. That's it. That's all you need to know. And it's fine. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Well, I was gonna say, and it's important to cover both. But I feel like now with YouTube Fitness, with the creation of the shorts and also the popularity of TikTok, it's skewed in an extreme direction where it's become too simplistic, where you don't learn a single thing. Like it's just you can't cover. Some topics are meant to be complex. It cannot be summed up in 30 seconds. You require a little bit more of a discussion. Now, there is a thing as being concise. Maybe instead of being a 10-minute video, it could be 3 minutes. But it also comes down to being patient with the learning process and understanding that not everything is like overly simple.
And we're going right back to the point of YouTube Fitness trying to always oversimplify things and all of these aesthetic broad channels that get people to be dumb. And you see TikTok as, in a sense, the crystallization of that, to a point where it's a little bit scary to see. I don't know how you feel about that as a quote-unquote young boomer, of someone who is close to his 30s. I see TikTok and I see the fitness part of it, and I'm thinking, man, this is going to produce a generation of lifters who know nothing, who
Yeah.
don't understand a single thing, and who are going to have bad physiques. The thing with that too is those kids are going to also take down the standards, because if you look at what we've dealt with and it produced what we discussed with Schrödinger's genetics, then by default we can also surmise that it's going to be even worse. But in that sense, they get bad information, they get bad physiques, they're going to think it's because they have bad genetics.
Wow.
And we enter that loop that's never going to end.
That sounds like a crazy loop right there. So they're being told they have bad genetics by people who are abusing steroids most likely. And now the information they do receive is a 15-second short or some idiotic guy who's probably fake natty himself giving bad advice at the same time. Because also the more you simplify it, the more the culture changes over time. And now what might start off as a quality short becomes worse and worse. I can see that happening for sure, especially as the newer generation comes into it. They become influencers themselves. They might not have the knowledge base of those who started the shorts. So the information in this case would be downgraded, not evolved, which is a scary, scary thought.
And it's like bizarro wood, right? We are sitting there trying to refine programming, get rid of the bad stuff so that we can always keep the good and the pure. They do the exact opposite. They get rid of all of the nice stuff. They keep only the impurities that shine, and you think it's gold. It's not gold, it's nickel, it's something else. And because they do that in such small formats, you don't even have the time to taste the poison in it. It's too fast. And it's a discrepancy between the amount of information and the size of the guy. I think it's a good equation to make. Big guy equates big knowledge. For natural bodybuilders and athletes in general, that is true 100% of the time. Everyone who has a good physique knows how they got it, and they can teach you, like right now.
Tell you every facet of it. They remember the years, everything
about it.
Yeah.
These guys with their shorts don't. That's why they use shorts, is because if they didn't, you would be able to tell, hey, that guy is not super smart. So 15 seconds of bicep curls with a plate, and that's it. You think that's the secret formula to big biceps.
Well, that's why a lot of them make up movements, because they can't even tell you how they got results. And the way they're promoting their training, that's not actually how they work out. Like there was one dude who's made quite a name for himself in YouTube. And he promotes a variety of movements that I've never seen anyone in the gym do. And he touts them as being the best exercises usually, right? And if you look at some of his older footage, how he got big was the complete opposite of that. And then some subscribers pointed out that they saw the same man in the gym doing those conventional movements. So really what it is a show. You got the lights on, the proper camera, you're pumped up, and now let me show these kids who don't know any better a fun way to work out that got me these gains, which is not how I got these gains. And then that becomes regurgitated by other people, and it further creates this loop of absolute craziness. And now all the influencers are doing that on Instagram and TikTok. It's all a bunch of bullshit. That's the furthest thing from the basics, the furthest thing from what actual natural bodybuilders have done over the years.
Bodybuilding is suffering, as I said, from its visual criteria that are intrinsic to the sport, right? It's bodybuilding is you look a certain way. The problem with that is that the way you got that is up to your own honesty to admit. If you want to be a liar about it, you can. And if you realize that young kids, adolescents, are going to be more responsive to flashy stuff, innovative stuff, gimmicky stuff, then you can just say, hey, my muscle that I have right now is thanks to this and not thanks to the rest. A few people will go full detective mode and find out, but the vast majority won't. So they'll espouse that. And I know exactly what you're talking about. We don't need to name people, but I know for a fact that this guy will produce a generation of people who are going to be forever small, and the same guys are going to grow the ranks of the black belt lifters in 2-3 years, because they're going to be like, okay, this guy is big. I followed his advice for 3 years. I'm still puny. This must be my genetics. No, you follow a con man, right? You're following the circus and you wonder why you became a clown. Well, there's no real surprise here. The people that you take advice from don't know anything. So now you know anything and you don't know anything and you're small.
Yeah. And with some of these people, I'll read in the comment section sometimes, like how they really enjoy the video. but it usually doesn't expand more than that. Like they'll like the personality of the guy. Oh, this was well edited, well presented, but it's never about gains. And if people do discuss it, they can't actually quantify what they produce. And it's funny how they never have videos of their progress. So I feel like they've almost deluded themselves into believing that this stuff actually works. And maybe they'll realize it one day, and that's when the whole black pilling will return.
Pointing out the audience is important, as you've done, because what they enjoy is the spectacle. It's not the information. And we are seeing that more and more on YouTube Fitness and every single platform. It's more about the production value, the editing stuff, the lighting, the music, the sound, whatever, with information being all the way at the bottom of the list. But these people will never actually admit that to themselves. Just like the guy who is running that show will never tell you, hey, I'm just making that to make you captivated by my big muscles and the way I do things. He'd never admit that he's not teaching you anything, because it would reveal the entire entourloupe, as we say in French. But the problem is that the audience itself cannot tell, because you see that with them, as you said, they love the video. I love the video. What did they love? The information? No. The personality of the guy that might or might not be fake, his muscles, the lighting, all of that, that's good, but that's secondary. The number one thing should be content, not form.
Exactly. Actually, I have the perfect analogy for this. It's like in Naruto, that red moon. What was it called again?
Sorry again?
You know Naruto, the red moon. Everyone is like they're cast under the spell.
Oh. Wait a second. Is that a jutsu you're talking about?
No, it's at the end.
If you're talking about the end, I shunned the entire arc because it was garbage. So I don't know how it ends. Sorry.
Okay. Basically, it's like a spell that everyone has fallen under and they're unable to get out of it.
Yeah, it's genjutsu.
How do we help these people get out of this situation? Like I know, because I think you've discussed how some tactics won't work. We can't use the same tactics as them, right? If we're trying to expose. So what is the best way of educating these people who actually are lost? How do we allow them to see the light?
Well, first off, you pointed out that doesn't always work, because there are those who are so cognitively dissonant that even if you show them that's their situation and you prove it to them, they will not accept it, because it's not something that they can face. At this point, they would rather live in a delusion than face reality, because reality is too tough, right? In a sense, you follow a fake natty for 5 years, and 2 years in, you have a choice to make. Either admit that you just spent 2 years wasting your time and worshipping a guy, or spend another 3 years in the delusion. You would be surprised at the amount of people that would consciously pick the second choice, because they never want to wake up to reality, because it's too hard to face. It's the sunken cost fallacy. You've already wasted so much time, why not more? Because if you just have to now make a change, it's going to be painful. So most people will not do that. The second strategy, and the one that works the best but is the tougher to implement, is to tell people to live in reality and try things themselves and observe the results. Let's say you follow that clown on YouTube Fitness. For 6 months, you've seen almost no results. That should tell you something, that maybe his methods are not right. That takes a level of awareness that a lot of people don't have, but it's the most doable for people. The problem being that, and this is another issue with this entire circle we just described and the loop, most of the people on these guys' channels are novices, meaning that whatever they do
they'll see
works.
Gains at the start.
Regardless of what you do, it will work. So this is why these people also prey on novices, because they understand that regardless of the garbage they spout, the novice will see gains, and because the novice tends to become fanboys, they are going to say, oh, I got these gains thanks to you. So your methods are the best. No, his methods are terrible. Your body's adaptation is amazing, but not because of him. You would have gotten the same gains or better from someone else, but this is just enough to keep them in, and past that, if they see no results, they will justify it.
They'll bring it back to them having bad genetics because they got results at the start. Dude, that's insane. So that's exactly why they prey on novices, because it's the only people they can affect. Their tactics won't work on someone who's been training for 5 years already. They're going to try the workouts and be like, what the fuck is this? Or just looking at it objectively, this is not what optimal programming entails, especially if they've been committed to natural game. We know that's not going to get results, at least in an optimal sense. So by preying on those who are actual beginners, like these are the people who are going to go on YouTube the first time, and the algorithm is going to recommend these videos to them. They follow the advice. They're getting the absolute start of the newbie gains, like the literal beginning. And then it's like, wow, this person really knows what they're talking about. They're not only jacked and have this amazing production quality, but I'm actually getting gains until what, 4-6 months pass by, and now it's no longer quite the same. Oh, maybe I have to buy this person's program. Maybe I just need to devour more of their content, or it just leads to them justifying some of their bad decisions.
You just described what is going to become that person's natural limit. So we are right now, if I were to give you a number, most people would say that you reach your natural limit within 3 years. That's what most of the people who spout the natural limit lie are going
like
to
3
base
to
it off
5,
of.
you know?
That's already terrible. Now think of someone who is going to think that you can get that in 6 months, because they will see their first plateau following bad methods in 6 months. That spreads. That type of culture is what makes YouTube fitness. We're going to end up with a generation of people who are going to have no gains. They're going to be smaller than average people, and they're going to think that that's it, that's their top, that's their max.
Yeah.
And to go back on the novice thing, it's even worse than you described, because the more novices watch these people's channels, the more they get recommended, the more novices watch.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, these people, with their advice, are going to keep these lifters in the novice stage forever. So in terms of knowledge, they're not going to be ever able to tell that the guy is lying, because the guy is not giving him the weapons to tell. And two, they create their own misery, because the more they watch the guy and say he's a god, the more novices join, stay novices, bulk up the ranks, attract more novices. It's like a black hole.
Yeah. It further strengthens the negative narrative. Everyone is a prisoner of the novice phase. And it's crazy because it would be so easy for them to get out of it. But because now this is a norm, the message is being spread that you don't have good genetics, you're getting close to your natural limit, you can only put on so much size. Because all these messages are being spread constantly, it's like there's almost no salvation unless they're able to somehow get out of that trap. But it's like, I hope we don't get to that point. I feel like as long as we continue to speak the truth, there's always going to be an audience that is receptive. But I don't believe that'll be the majority, unfortunately. I think it like natural bodybuilding in general is going to be somewhat niche. And as you say in your other videos, it could have been something really beautiful, and there's potential to revive it, but it won't be on the same scale that was originally thought, at least what the founders thought it was going to be.
We can't go back on that, sadly, right? We could have, but it didn't happen. So at this point, there's no point in crying over spilled milk. I see many natural bodybuilders doing that, or they live in the past and we could have been this. Well, we're not that. Well, we were taken over. It's like we're a small business that could have been big, but Walmart took over, and now they're big. You can cry about it all you want. They're there. So what do? Well, we use the only weapons we have: authenticity, honesty, and results. That's what we have. This is what you get when you go to a small mom and pop shop. It's good quality stuff. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive. Yes, you might have to spend more time to travel there, but at the end of the day, it's worth it. People are going to resonate with that. They're going to come back to that. This is how you win the game. You cannot win the game by following the methods of these people. It's not possible. Like, imagine if I started doing this 6-minute long videos with good lighting and good video and whatever, like do this curl for big biceps. It would not get me where I want to be. And even if it did, I would just become one of them. So I lose. We all lose in the end. So we cannot play their game. We cannot abide by their rules. And we need to just segregate ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Trying to save as many of their subs as possible. Because to me, when I leave comments on people's channels, in some channels, I was just
trolling them.
just trying to be funny. On your channel, I was telling you, or even discussing training with you sometimes, but on their channels, I was always trolling them, one, and two, I was trying to show their subscribers, hey, this is an inadequacy and inaccuracy in his discourse. I'm pointing it out with a joke so that he cannot tell, so that he doesn't delete the comment. Because most of these guys had no clue. Sometimes they liked my comment. I was like, okay, you don't understand English, right? And then some of their subs were like, there's a second meaning to this. Maybe he's right. Let me see what it's all about. Because natural bodybuilding is reality. Like the PED stuff, all of that, it's spectacle, but it's fake. A spectacle is by definition fake. The people who see through the fakeness are going to be salvaged. The others, hopefully at some point, will, but we cannot speed it up, right? It's going to be a slow process.
So we have to accept that. Just like natural bodybuilding is a slow process, the process of attracting people who are like-minded is the same way. And it's also important to recognize that there will always be a group of such individuals that can detect the fakeness in these fake natties and realize that this isn't quite right. There's something off here. Sure, the presentation is fantastic. These guys got great physiques, but it's not adding up. It can't be that the majority are novices for life, that people are just struggling so much to get results when it can't be that complicated, you know? And when they come to guys like you who are telling it how it is and break it down without resorting to insults, ad hominem attacks, you just bring it back to facts and logic, or just looking at history from those who, because when we talk about the certainty of naturals, there isn't any proof of that for anyone moving forward. All we have is you just have your trust in that person, and that's even the person could be a psychopath, a sociopath rather. You don't know that about them, right? So the only confirmation we'll always have is the guys from the past. Otherwise, you got to trust what the person's saying, and word of mouth is going to be the key to building a community of people who are not so defensive.
I mean, bodybuilding is a verbal tradition to start with. Like even on YouTube Fitness, we're continuing that. It's rarely written, and I think it should stay that way because it's the transmission of knowledge. But this also means that you're going to rely on your trust of someone to be able to know if they're worth following or not, which then leads to the question, who is real and who is not? Because we sit there right now discussing YouTube Fitness as if we were like the purest of angels. Like people don't know. Like maybe with you they know because you have a long history, you're more open about who you are than I am. But for me, for example, and I've spoken to my subscribers on that term very many times, I could be a liar. It is possible, there is always a possibility that I could be someone that is very advanced in manipulation tactics and that I have an end goal. But the good thing is that if you keep an eye on the end goal, you can always know whether or not that person is trustworthy, because I've always said to my subs, if I start selling you stuff, this is when you know that you need to vacate the channel, because now I'm going to be skewed towards certain things. And so now the manipulation can take place. If I don't sell you anything, unless I have some weird bias towards manipulating people, I don't get anything out of it. So logically speaking, it's not there. This is where the trust starts and ends. And also it would lead to people who don't become paranoid, because if there are people who are complete fanboys and blind on YouTube Fitness, you have the opposite as well. You have people who doubt everyone. Like you can tell them the sky is blue and they'll say no. You're lying to me right now. And this is something I never really expressed, but it's still parasocial. It's people who are still in an emotional relationship with YouTubers, that they feel betrayed to the point that their own confidence in themselves and their ability to know if someone is a liar or not has disappeared.
Yes.
So they're afraid of everyone.
Yeah, that's pretty much universal in life. You get screwed over one time, and now the assumption that everyone is like that, and you end up becoming bitter and angry, and that's where a lot of these hate groups come out from, and what many people describe as the truth, right? But the truth is just one experience, and it just so happens that many had that same experience, but that doesn't mean it's universally correct. And when you point out the flaws in their logic, they usually just resort to ad hominem attacks because they've closed off their mind to other possibilities.
And it's sad to be like this, but I know that I almost ended up that way when I was younger, so I understand where the trap is and how I avoided it. The problem is that for you and I, there was maybe one or two traps, but these fake natties on YouTube Fitness are laying there like every day, traps everywhere. So it's the reason why we get more and more of these people. A normal lifter would stay relatively centered. right? They would have their own ability to understand if something is correct or incorrect, and they would have their trust to give. That's not most people on YouTube Fitness nowadays. Most people are either complete fanboys or complete haters, but there's no in between because their objectivity has been removed. And I don't blame them. I blame the people who took it from them. I blame the people who are multiplying at an alarming rate, who do that to people, who turn them into that, because you don't become jaded by yourself. That's a lie. Someone made you that way. They're not responsible for your shitty choices afterwards or your life. You're responsible to stay a normal person and balanced and healthy. But I can see where it came from. I see the source. And you made that point too. You said we cannot expect these people to go away, right? We cannot expect the people who mistrust us or the fanboys to go away entirely. There's always going to be some level of that. That is true only because we cannot expect the people who create them to go away because they follow the basic principles of capitalism and making mercantile gains. This is the best way to run a channel on YouTube Fitness, is to get fanboys using these methods because they buy whatever you sell. As long as this remains the truth, they will stay dominant. We can't do anything about that because they create fanboys who themselves create that type of channels because they create a demand. It's shitty. Like, I don't like it, but I also see that the only way to break that cycle is to have a small influence, because the more people you can take away from the fanboyism, the less of a power these channels have, the more fanboys they can create, etc.
Right. And I think that's why you lean on the extreme of honesty and transparency to the point of even calling yourself out in some instances. Like, you made that your channel name is Natural Hypertrophy, and you made a video saying I may or may not be natural. And you're having this discussion, just saying that your viewers need to analyze everything that comes out of someone's mouth. But by you laying everything on the line like that and speaking out against censorship, saying, you know what, say whatever you want, I don't care. I'm not going to delete your comments. I'm not going to block you. You're allowed to say what you want to say. And this is my position. I stand by it. I'm not going to attack all these dudes. I'm just going to present the logic, and you can do what you want with that information. By just being totally, I would describe it as stoic, it develops that level of trust. And these people who've been jaded in the past can now look at you and say, huh, maybe this guy is a little bit different. And it creates that collective. And then other people start doing the same thing. They kind of, you talked earlier about people copying each other, right? Well, sometimes that's not always a bad thing if the intentions are correct. I can think of a few Finnish channels that are operating in a similar way right now, and I like what they're doing. They're doing a great job at strengthening the natural community. The methods are the same, but it's not negative and it's extremely honest. So I think bring it back to word of mouth, like we previously discussed, and just not being fearful about the outcome regarding how your subscribers feel about you. You just say, okay, this is what it is. It creates that further level of trust, and that's when people can start to, pick themselves up again.
Yeah, and they can start to have faith again, not just in other people, which is incredibly important because we live in societies, but also in themselves, that they have the ability to tell between the wrong and the bad. And it's also the faith aspect to me is very important, because many people on YouTube Fitness and in the world in general, they see their environment and they say, okay, my life is predetermined because I was born in such and such environment. But the problem is that they don't take into account that they themselves are a part of the environment. And even though the environment is stronger than them, I'm not going to argue against that, they can influence it.
Yep.
So for me, what I'm doing is objectively, I assess that the situation is terrible and dire, and that I could be a part of the problem, so you need to be skeptical of me. But I will do my best to change the trajectory, because I understand that if the current situation on YouTube Fitness is as it is, it's because people made it that way. It's not just
By coincidence.
It didn't come out of nowhere, right? A process made that, and you pointed it out. When YouTube Fitness started, it wasn't like this. These people slowly but surely took space. They replaced the informative videos with entertainment, and it took them years to get there. So we're not going to just get rid of them in 6 months. It will take us years. But as you said, we do that through honesty. And if we can make the new brand of popular YouTube channels massively honest channels, then even though we would still have the upper end and we would become the dominant force, it would be self-contained, and we would still be able to reflect upon ourselves so we wouldn't become dangerous, as long as the subscribers allow us to be. The subscribers need to stay a force that is going to balance us. I like when my subs call me out, because I'm the first person who calls myself out all the time. So if you say something, trust me, I knew about that 2 months ago, but I like that you pointed out, because it shows the group that, hey, it's okay to say that NH is wrong. It's okay to ask questions, because it's the human experience. We question everything.
Yeah, we have to be willing to put each other in check. And that's how everybody's going to keep growing. And what's interesting, I just thought about this. Even if some of these influencers don't change, as the natural community continues to develop, there will be a greater level of honesty that cannot be escaped, because people will know better to a certain extent. What I specifically mean in this case is when someone is obviously enhanced and they still claim natty, they will get called out. You'll see it in the comment section. You'll see it by other fitness influencers. They can't get away with it to the same extent. People who did that back then, those tactics are not working in 2021. So already we're moving in that direction. And there are some influencers who are not afraid to be honest about that. Obviously, there's some financial incentive when they're sponsoring certain athletes. They might not call out those individuals. So there is a level of bias. But on a general level, I do find that we are getting smarter overall, even if there's a sea of nonsense.
If we're going to talk methods with what you just described, you pointed out something related to the environment again. If we are to get rid of these people, we can't do it one by one, right? That's why the fake natty videos and the natty or not videos don't work. They've never worked. It's because pointing out this guy and saying he's not natural, great. He falls down. If you manage, 15 are going to take its place.
Yeah.
This doesn't work. You cannot eliminate the problem like this. You have to make the environment into a place so toxic for them through honesty that they cannot survive. Because now, if we're going to, and by that, I don't want to dehumanize these people. It's just the best example I can find. If we're going to compare them to roaches, you can try to kill one roach. Good luck with that, getting rid of the entire colony. It's never going to work. If anything, you're strengthening the colony. But if you make their environment unsuitable for life, the entire colony will go away. And now you have your apartment or whatever house back.
Amen, bro. It really, that's what it comes down to. You have to be honest and provide good information. At some point, people realize this doesn't add up. And you said you compared them to roaches, right? It's interesting you mentioned that, because my viewpoint about these individuals is that they're scum. They're not good human beings, and they've destroyed the fitness community. They have caused so many problems, and I have no respect for them. I don't care if they're good people outside of their career. They're liars, and I just want the audience to think about what they do behind the scenes. They turn on their camera. Hey everybody, I'm gonna teach you how to get big biceps. And then they show all their fancy exercises that they themselves don't do. They give garbage advice. And then when they turn off the camera, they got needles right there and they're injecting themselves. And I want you guys to imagine the needle going in their body. And then the next day they come back in and they talk about how they're lifetime naturals, even though none of what they do resembles what the real naturals do. So I find it extremely insulting when they do that, and it's disrespectful to you guys because they don't care about you. They take the money and they leave. They don't stick around for the long haul. And yeah, that's my perspective on them. What do you think?
I agree. And I think some people would get upset and say, oh, you're being mean. But you have to understand that these people started it. Like, if we had been left alone, us, the naturals, we would have had done our own thing, have our own community with no need for drama. Again, drama is a result of PD users. They started it. It's because of them. This platform is polluted by their content and the content that people make about them. It's insane. It's like even their existence itself is toxic to us, and therefore calling them scum is perfectly viable and justifiable because that's what they are, and they know it. I think you've expressed the level of cognitive dissonance it takes to take grams of stuff and then claim natural. You see some of these guys, and I know that some viewers like to think that they're trolls and they're advanced, like sarcasm artists. They're not. they're not as advanced intellectually to be able to produce that type of advanced humor and comedy. It's not that. It's just that they have convinced themselves that what they do is righteous, that the lies that they spout are justifiable, and it takes your own subjectivity to realize that it's not, that you deserve better, and that these people at the end of the day are the result for the destruction of this platform. They are to blame. Too many people don't like to assign blame. Assigning blame is my favorite sport because being judgmental is life. Of course, we judge people. Someone does something wrong, you point them out so that you can solve the situation. If you want to be a goody two shoes for the rest of your life, you can just say, oh, it's no one's fault and it's just the environment. The environment is like this because of them.
Exactly. And the sooner we accept that, that's when people will stop getting walked all over, because that's what's happened. And I think a lot of individuals are also afraid to speak out because it has become the mainstream narrative. And now it's gotten to the point where these people are so open about their usage that even if they don't recommend you do the same thing, people will still go down that path because they think it's cool and they're going to be like their idols. And now they kind of have that hope that, hey, I could look like this guy if I take the stack. And I feel like they still deserve criticism. I feel like by them talking so freely about PEDs, it actively encourages people to get on them. In my opinion, they were better off in the forums where they kept everything private, because you make that publicly available to an audience of, like you said, novices, which is the majority of YouTube fitness. You're gonna have a greater percentage of individuals becoming enhanced and never realizing their true natural potential.
This is the PD slope. This is the PDU slippery slope. And we've seen that. You've seen that on YouTube Fitness. It started as hush hush. Like it was don't ask, don't tell. No one was talking about it openly. And then eventually the can of worms was busted open because those people were forced to reveal their hands. They were forced.
Yeah.
The environment forced them. So again, go back to the environment. Their lives were not standing anymore. It didn't work. So what did they do? Did they actually become honest and say, okay, I actually take drugs, I'm sorry for lying, and yes, I get the results from the drugs? No, they went right back to the next step of the plan, which is downplaying the effectiveness of drugs. And then that was only step 2. Step 3 was what? Not even mentioning the effectiveness and just saying, well, yes, I'm enhanced and it is what it is. We've gotten to a point where people have more trust in open drug users than naturals because at the end of the day, they're open. Right?
Like it's better to be an honest drug user than a fake natty at this point.
Exactly. And you and I, we could be using, who knows, maybe I'm pinning every single day after this interview, I'm going to be pinning. You don't know that. But this is a situation I want people to think about. We've gotten to a point where drug users have created a scenario where they can be the heroes of the story because they're real, and they made us, the real naturals, the villains because we cannot be open because we don't use drugs.
That's crazy, man. So they started the problem and now they're going to fix it. The villains end up becoming the good guys in the end. That's essentially what's happening.
You used the term psychopath and then you corrected it into sociopath. Regardless of which denomination you want to use, it's exactly what these people do. They start a fire and then they extinguish it and they ask you for credit for extinguishing the fire they started. It's an antisocial type of behavior, and it's no surprise that the vast majority of big fake natty YouTubers have some antisocial and sociopathic traits. These people tend to do really good in life, right? If you have a boss or if you have a manager, someone high up in companies, a lot of the time tests have proven that these people tend to be some level of psychopath or sociopath because it gives them an advantage because they fuck over people without any remorse.
No remorse, And you know, just the fact that they're willing to inject themselves, just the thought of that should turn anyone off. Make you fitness realize that, yeah, a lot of them are sociopathic by nature. That's fucked up. I'm sorry. So like I wouldn't be able to live with myself. I would just have to come out and say, yeah, I do this. This is what it is. But they don't have an issue. There's not an ounce of guilt when you look into their eyes. And that is like crazy to see. And the only time they have to admit it is when they announce TRT, which is also a lie because that's imposed. You're 26 years old and you need TRT. Why? It's not because you did a few natural bodybuilding competitions. I got shredded not too long ago. My libido was down, but guess what? 2 weeks later, I'm back. You shut yourself down because of your decisions with drugs. And now you're going to lie to your audience and say that, oh, I'm just one of these rare individuals that's young and healthy, which doesn't make any sense, because if you eat properly and you train, like, natural bodybuilding makes you age gracefully. Notice how all the best natural bodybuilders look phenomenal. Whether in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they age backwards. Your biological age should be almost reflected in your looks. These people age like garbage. And then coincidentally, they got low T at a young age. And then they're going to make that justifiable to global audience. Get on TRT. It's good for you. You need it. Okay, great. If you're 50 years old and you've tried every possible method to raise your natural T, still nothing works, okay, fine. I'm not a medical professional in this regard. But if you're young and healthy and you did that to yourself because of PEDs, then you're not being honest at all. You're just, once again, downplaying the drugs and what they've done.
Right on. And that TRT thing is something I've discussed on the channel in the past. It's another step of the plan.
Yeah.
When you can't say, oh, I'm taking hard drugs and it's completely legal, what do? You retreat back and you say, no, I'm doing something legal. It's prescribed by a doctor. Your doctor is named Pedro in Florida and he has a youth clinic. He's not a doctor. He's in the business of selling hormones. Of course, he's going to prescribe you that. I know guys who are on TRT, they get test, they get DECA, and they get GH. That's not TRT, that's a cycle. And they know it, but they play on words. TRT is the new steroids. But instead of having to admit, yes, guys, I'm on much more test than the average male, they can just say, oh, TRT. TRT is what we call in French un fourre-tout. You can put anything in that. TRT can be 100 milligrams a week. It can be 300. It can be 500, depending on who you ask. And we're dealing with people who are talking to young audiences, telling them that drugs are bad, but TRT is okay.
Yeah.
Drugs and TRT are the same thing. TRT is legalized drugs. And I know many people don't like to hear that, and many people disagree with that. But to me, there is a social aspect to drugs. You can influence people to jump on drugs. I've seen that when I was young in high school, where all of my friends smoked. Why do they smoke? Because everyone smokes. It was cool to be a smoker. Out of a class of 28, there were 3 people who didn't smoke, including me. In college, in a class of 55, there was 1 person who didn't smoke. It was me, because everyone else was being pressured by the social environment to smoke, even though it was damaging their health. It did nothing for them. It was only toxic. It was $10 a pack. It was super expensive. Still did it. So TRT is the same thing. When you speak to young, skinny kids and you tell them, well, you might have low T. The guy looks down on his arms. He has skinny arms. He thinks, oh, he's right. I have low T. No, you're young and skinny, just like I was. If you give yourself time, as you said, bodybuilding is the natural way for a man to age in terms of muscular development. You're going to grow into being a man. But if you inject, it's never going to happen. You're going to replace your masculine development by drugs, and then your masculine potential dies because your hormonal profile dies because it has no reason to exist. And now you can go back and say, oh, I actually need TRT. Yeah, you need it because you did it to yourself. You sabotaged yourself, and now you are justified in your dangerous habits that started because you were convinced by someone who did the exact same thing. We go back to projection.
Yeah. And what's interesting with these people is they'll talk about all the benefits of TRT, and you see the excitement in their eyes. They absolutely love the way they feel, and they do. They feel like, they're making great gains, and I'm sure it's nice having an elevated hormonal profile. But they hype it up too much, to the point where the little disclaimer at the end doesn't mean anything. Because if you have a 10-minute video and you're talking about how awesome it is to be on TRT, and then the last 30 seconds you're like, by the way, go see a doctor. Don't do this. I'm not encouraging anyone to take drugs. What do you think they're going to do? They're not going to listen to that final message. Heck, most people don't even have the attention span to make it that far into the video, especially if it's the final thing you leave off with. So what they see is, wow, TRT is phenomenal, and I want it too. So then begins the fantasizing. You're 23 years old and you dream of the day that you'll be on TRT. Oh, I can't wait till I'm 30 so that I too can make these excellent gains. Oh, I can't wait till my T levels start going down. This way I can actually get a little bit more muscle gains than being a lifetime natty.
And this should be terrifying for any mentally healthy male. To hear someone tell you, oh, I cannot wait for my test levels to crash. What? So you're excited to be on drugs to the point
Oh.
that you want your gonads to dry off. That's as bad as it has gotten. And these guys are not going to be honest too. You know it. They're not going to actually wait for their T level to drop. They're going to, the second they feel the slightest hinge of fatigue, they'll say, oh, that's it. They won't even get a blood test. TRT. Meanwhile, my grandpa is 92. He's still relatively jacked at 92. He's not on TRT. He doesn't even know what test is. He's never heard of it in his life.
Good genetics, bro.
See, and then, but that's the thing too. People would reflect back because it's the paradigm you described. It's drugs and genetics. It's all you talk about, drugs and genetics.
Exactly.
Those two are completely worthless. If you just push them aside, you see what's in between, which is the reality of the situation.
Yeah. I think drugs and genetics matters a lot in competitive pro bodybuilding, but for anyone else, they shouldn't overly concern themselves with that. Honestly, a lot of it is just a waste of time. And at the end of the day, we have to be the best versions of ourselves and not even look at competitive standards per se, considering that bodybuilding is your individual expression. Just like you talked about the berserker physique, I went over bear mode. We're not doing this to step on a stage, especially considering those standards have been messed with on a level that doesn't represent the original nature of natural bodybuilding. Back then, they weren't 6% body fat with striated glutes. They might have been, 10, 12%. They were a little bit fluffier, and that's what gave them the size. So I think it's important to recognize that we're seeking hypertrophy, and we're bodybuilders are in our own mind, not that we're trying to compare ourselves to everyone else that steps on the stage.
Because we can't. On top of that, it's also the problem. It's the problem when you butt heads with people who take drugs, because they can always resort to the appeal to physique. They can always say, "Well, I'm bigger than you," and the audience in general responds to that. Rightfully so, because when you take advice from someone in terms of muscular development, you want them to be big. But drugs have thrown a wrench into that entire equation, because the guy is not big off of the training, he's big off the drugs. So they have that advantage we can never make up for. What we have, or however they don't have, is stability, health, and old age. Because you said that they don't age gracefully. That's if they age at all. Most of them don't even age. By the time they're 50, they're gone. We as natural bodybuilders should be the most healthy, the most endurant males on the planet. And I say bodybuilders, natural athletes in general. We should make it until we are in our hundreds. That should be our norm, the baseline. And we should do that in the full ownership of our health. We should still be powerful, mobile. I see that many people would think of that as impossible. And these are the people who say by the time you're 80, you fall apart and it's over. We can change that, but the only thing that can change it is real natural bodybuilding.
Yeah, I feel like we can do better than what exists out there. Like in the nutritional realm, I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Dr. Furman. He always talks about, because there's a group of individuals, it's called the blue zones, right? There are certain people in this world that generally tend to be centenarians, certain areas, right? And you can pinpoint all the factors that they have in common, and this is what leads to them living a long life, right? And one of those factors is the diet. Now, this doctor I follow, he says, great, they're centenarians, they're doing fantastic, and this is probably one of the healthiest diets you could possibly follow. But guess what? We can do better than the blue zones. And I extend that to training in the sense that we now have so much information about optimal programming. We have the history of natural bodybuilders who did live long. We have evidence that you could be at an older age, still be jacked, healthy, all that stuff. Since people have already paid their dues for us in a way they sacrifice, that should elevate our standards even higher. And so if you look at even the calisthenics community, many of them do not follow optimal programming. They're in their 50s and 60s and they're ripped up, look phenomenal. I can guarantee you those people didn't think about their genetics. And I can guarantee you most of them are not on TRT. They just stayed active their entire life. And if you do that, if you actually embrace this as a permanent lifestyle, not some trend that you're going to train hard for the next 3 months and then completely slack off. If you embrace this, like you accepted that this is going to be for the rest of your life, and you don't care how slow the gains may be, then technically you should be getting better as you age. And what you're always saying in your videos is your 20s is not your peak. You should have a better physique in your 30s, 40s, not going down like what so many of the juice heads will say will happen to you. Now, maybe we're younger, so we can't speak about that. But how come the old school greats all hit their peak at the levels that your T is supposed to crash to nothing? How'd that work out?
Yeah, funny how that works, right? Some people would tell you that, oh, it's because the genetic makeup of humanity changed in what, like 60 years? Like, I want to slap these people with the book of evolution because they don't understand what has happened to us. The change was the environment. It's the reason why we're struggling. And the people that made the environment toxic is the people we already described. In this situation, as you said, we see already that there are people who make it into an old age, and we know exactly what they do. We know also we can do better than that, right? It's in a sense building upon what our ancestors left us. To me, it would be shameful to die at a younger age than my grandpa.
Yeah.
Because I have such an easier life than he had, which also could contribute to people being soft nowadays, but that's a different question. And the only thing that I have to do in reality to make it to his age and beyond is to not be an idiot. Meaning, look at your diet, don't fall for modern trends, be logical, and keep training. And just with that, if people just applied this, we could make people live a longer, but not just longer, a healthier life. Because many people, they might die in their 70s, but they were already dead in their 50s because they had pains, they were immobile, inflammation nonstop. That's not life. You should be able to be physically active and vibrant into your 70s, 80s, 90s, because all of the stuff that plagues people nowadays, the back pain, the gut problems, the cancers, all of that, it's what we've done to us. It's what we let the environment do to us. So it's our responsibility to just push it back, right? The way of the ancestors led them to an old age in a different wood. That wood is still underneath the surface. We can still live in that wood.
Yeah, humankind has to evolve, and grandchildren should do better than their grandparents. Understanding that there's more information available, there's the advancement of medical technology. There's so, like, we live in the, Napoleon Hill described this as infinite intelligence. There will come a time where you have access to everything. This is it. It's the 21st century. We have the internet. There is every possible resource that you can think of, learning from men all over the globe. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be better than those from the past. And also, 90% of cancers are diet related. Obviously, there's the hereditary factors, but just to say, you have a lot more control than you realize on that element. And when we talk about injuries, well, guess what? That comes back to smart programming, because the pro bodybuilders who didn't have to think about that got overuse, and they got away with improper form and using the wrong movements. When you're natty, well, it's not just about being natty, but in general, with a higher collective of information, that leads to a lifting society that has less injuries as a whole. And we now know about corrective exercise. There's so much, we're not in the dark anymore. It's not some methods that haven't been tested, like one of the things being the reverse hyper for lower back. If Louis Simmons was able to break his back many times, then still come in and compete, what does that say? And he did it old and banged up. And one thing I'd like to point out is a lot of steroid users do use medical advancements to help them out, right? And that does mitigate a lot of the problems that they otherwise would have experienced sooner. Imagine if you're natty and you also take advantage of that. Like, now you got the best of all worlds, and technically you should be killing it your whole life. Excellent quality of life.
Yeah, and the problem with the steroid advice also is that, from what I've seen, a lot of the people who end up on TRT or on that type of drugs, they camouflage issues, but they never realize it. Just like a lot of the problems, the heart problems, for example, that arise with steroids arise when it's too late and you're already on the brink of death. The same is true with the things that you fix. Because many people think, oh, I have low energy, let me take TRT. Well, you still have low energy. The drug is making you think you have high energy. When that goes away, guess what? Your energy is even lower, because now you made your situation even worse. I was reading a comment that shocked me because I was feeling bad for the guy, thinking to the day where he was going to realize that he was wrong. It was a guy saying that he had massive shoulder issues and he jumped on TRT and drugs to feel better, and it worked. And I thought to myself, man, you don't realize it. The drug is numbing you. It's making you feel you're better. You're still working on that tendon. You're still degrading the tendon, upping the dose. The day you come off, you won't be able to raise your arm above your shoulder. The shoulder will be completely ruined. And you see that with drug users who tear a bicep, right? It's the big fear of people to tear a biceps. I do cheat curls with 100 pounds. I've never even come close to doing anything bad to my biceps, but people are paralyzed by the fear because you have steroid users who come on camera and say, well, I was doing normal curls and my bicep just tear off. Why?
Yeah.
He couldn't feel the pain. The drug was numbing him. The tendon was screaming in agony. He couldn't feel it. I guarantee you watching right now, if you have tendonitis so bad that your tendon is about to rupture, you will feel it. They don't.
It's funny when you see these injuries, the juice heads will make response videos and they're like, yeah, that's why I don't lift heavy, guys, because I'm going to tear a pec, I'm going to tear a bicep. No, you don't lift heavy because your tendons aren't where they should be. Because naturals generally, they could still experience that. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but it's far less. So when we talk about minimizing risk, it's by significant degrees. And I don't think people talk enough about that. And it's always their own projection, the drug users anyway. They're projecting their fears because they know what they're doing is wrong. And instead of addressing the root cause, how to actually fix this tendinopathy, what are actual methods besides just pinning that'll fix this from the get-go forever, they resort to just bring it back to the negativity of whoever they're criticizing.
Yeah, it boils down to drugs being the easy way out. And you see it with these people too, is when you observe their identity and their personality, I'm not going to call them cowards, but they tend to not be the most bravest or courageous of men. They give up really quickly when there's difficulties, and they speak to an audience of young kids that might be the same way, where they feel bad and they want an easy, quick fix. And the problem is that there's no such thing.
The proof is that they took steroids really early on. Like, I think the majority of these people got on within their first 2 to 5 years of lifting. And as you know very well, between year 5 and 10, you make a lot more gains. So they didn't even get to experience that. So already their mentality was from the get-go. They already had a I want results right now mentality. They couldn't, when things got hard, they resort to drugs. So what do you think they're going to do with every other aspect of the fitness journey? It's the same thing. That's always a solution.
Yeah, because when you take la voie de la facilité, when you take the way of facility and the easy path, you have dictated your life. You did it once. Why not twice? Why not 3 times? Okay, I can't get big. Let me take test. I can't cut fat. Let me take that fat cutting agent.
There you go.
I can't get shredded. Let me take this. It all becomes drugs, right? Their entire life is drugs. And then there's no space for training. So when the guy gives advice, what advice is he going to give? Drugs. That's all he knows.
They know it best. And that's also why it's hard to take advice on natural training from these individuals, because if they haven't been through the path, like, I'm just going to come out and say this. I started filming in 2013. Those videos weren't good. You know why? Because I didn't put in the proper amount of years. But guess what? The training experience I did have at the time is probably equivalent to many drug users who were likely twice my size. And they're coming from that same perspective. I can say that if you haven't trained for a really long time, you don't really know what you're talking about. You might think that you do, but you don't.
Yeah, and it's why so many of them also lie about the age when they started drugs. They always tell you, oh, I started when I was 22, 23, but in reality, they started when they were 16. And the reason why they do that is they understand that they should have spent that time naturally lifting, because it makes them, in a sense, credible. But because they never did that, they have to go back and lie.
They have to paint a picture that they hit their genetic limit. That's the only way they can get away with this.
Yeah. So, and then after that, when you are going to say you met your genetic limits, well, now you have to make it a concept that you project onto people.
So it basically, we're talking about so many insane things today that many are probably like, are you serious, guys? It goes this deep? But it does. It all stems from drugs. This is the start of the spider web. It connects every fucking problem, guys.
Yeah.
So
And
that's why guys like NH and myself are so frustrated with these individuals, because we know the harm that it's doing to the community.
yeah, and we get told, I don't know if that happens to you, but I have people sometimes who tell me, man, stop making everything about drugs. I can't. It's the catalyst. That's where it all
Exactly.
came from. If you observe the history of YouTube fitness and fitness in general, you should see that we were invaded by people on drugs, and now the result is everything you see around you. And if you think that's deep, well, buckle up, because it's not, like what we've touched upon is nothing. We can talk about supplements that are being pushed by drug users. We can
Yeah.
talk about like if you are in YouTube fitness, you are being exposed to psychological warfare to a level that you cannot comprehend because you entered the sphere when it was always in full blast. Like
Exactly.
this is post, yeah, it's
It's
post
post-war,
steroid.
basically.
It's post-war and post-steroid YouTube fitness. Steroids are already there when you enter. You and I, when we started, it was there, but not so prevalent. So we could see the slow shift and modification. Most people can't. Most people are just dumped into it.
Yeah. I can't believe how much it's changed over the years. Like, the reason why I became an influencer, well, there's many, but one of them was that I wanted to be like those guys from back then, like Scott Herman, like Scooby 1961, like Brandon Carter at the time. Uh, there weren't many people who made videos about fitness. It was a very, very small community. I think I remember when Scott first hit 100K subs, just to say, the best of the best did not have 1 million subs. It was so niche, right? But there were a lot of naturals, and I looked up to that. I was like, man, I want to be like these dudes. I want to give great advice one day. I could see myself in this world. And then you get in it, and it's not what you think it is. Then as the years pass by, it just gets worse and worse. And you're like, wow, I don't recognize this. But because you saw the entire evolution, you can speak from a different place compared to a guy who's a novice and just comes in 2021 or even 2020. Because a lot of gimmicky stuff started happening when global events occurred, right? So it's a shame that people are walking into all this garbage, and the algorithm doesn't help either.
Yeah, it reinforces it because it's the law of numbers, right?
The
Most people
lowest,
watch
yeah,
something, so more people are going to watch it. You can't blame YouTube. They're in this to make money. They
that's what
don't
it
really,
is.
they
Yeah,
don't care what they promote. It's up to us to offer good content and call out the people who make bad decisions and who are going to, in a sense, betray their audience and take up their just intelligence and turn it into something profitable for them. And you mentioned how back in the days it wasn't like this. I want to say something here. For the audience and for the people who watch Alex, you need to understand something. What's happening right now, a discussion between someone who has 20K subs and someone who has 200K subs, is abnormal. That never happens on YouTube Fitness. You will never get an influencer who shines the light on a smaller channel, never, especially not giving him a 3 hour segment. That's not possible. And the reason why is most fitness YouTubers are in it for themselves, not for the community and not for your knowledge. So if they were to give a spotlight or a shout out to someone else, it would take away from them. That's the way they perceive it. A real natural like Alex is going to see me and think, okay, we can shine together. And if we do, we're going to be brighter and we're going to influence people and actually tear down the shadows around us. That's the way we should think. The rest of YouTube fitness doesn't think like this, and it's because they're self-centered.
yeah,
Natural bodybuilding has always been a game of sharing. It's sharing. It's never about us. It's never about our own profit. And I
that's
hope
right,
that people realize that this is a very good way to tell between a genuine influencer and someone who is in it for profit.
man. That was beautifully said, and I really appreciate that, NH. And I feel like we're vibing so well, just going back and forth with these ideas, and we're bringing out concepts. Like I said some things to you today that I've never said on video before, even though I've made well over 1,000. So that's why the community is important, because you shine brighter as a group. And there's a lot of brilliant minds out there. Like, just to say, I didn't know you existed until like 2020, at least on your main channel. But you've been a subscriber all these years, and now we're collaborating and we're having this chat. And it's like there's a lot of people who are producing great content these days. Like even Jeffrey Very Schofield.
Yep.
Love what he's doing, and he's always been around. He's always been lifting. He just didn't have his channel available. So I feel like once you understand that real naturals will give you a shot, we will be part of this community. We're not in this for self-centered reasons. We do this for the greater good. Then you don't have to be fearful anymore. Come out, make your videos. You'll get some support, and that's the beauty in all this. Champions, like in our case, champions come in pairs of two, right? It's not about competition, it's collaboration right now. And everyone can learn from people who have experience in natural bodybuilding. So you might as well just make a channel and see where it goes. I'll support you if what you're doing is real.
Yeah, just do. I mean, I always think back to when I started the channel and I question myself, what if I had never done it? Well, if I had never done it, I would have never had the influence I have on the people who watch me trying to better their life. I would have never had that chat with you. And just like that, some of the ideas and the things you said today were reflections of what I said, because we bounce ideas off of each other. And that's why we become bigger. We have that power over them. Because at the end of the day, what I've always noticed with fake natties is they collab, they do the little thing, but they don't like each other. They're fake as fuck. They hate each other deep down. They use each other for views. And you see that because the second one of them gets cancelled, all of the other ones turn on the guy and they make drama videos about the guy because they were never real. It was always about maximizing profit. We maximize knowledge. And as you said, champions come in pair of two. I say even in pair of 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mentioned Joffrey. He's a great champion for natural lifting. His content is on the same level of honesty where you listen to him. He's not going to mince his words. He's going to tell you exactly what it is. And again, this is me putting my faith in people. It is important to do that. I have my hopes up that if he keeps growing, if I keep growing, if you keep growing, we can change this. Right, we will have enough power at some point to make the environment into a place where people can grow again and not be completely shriveled up. But it's going to take you guys putting in the work, all right? And it's going to take on our part the honesty to always stay real. This is something you've already, for you, it's already done. You've already proved it. You're already a big channel and you've stayed honest. But for me and Geoffrey, we still have that to prove, right? Because we could still become influenced. That's the problem with YouTube fitness. Money is very attractive, right? It's tempting to give in, especially when you see these fake natties. You think, man, I could get sponsored too, and I could sell supplements too. I have people on my channel who ask me all the time, hey, why don't you sell me a program or do that? I refuse because I know that it only reinforces the mercantile aspect of YouTube fitness that is already so strong that it's up to me to fight it as much as I can.
Right. I suppose we all have different ways of proving ourselves. And for you, you do it through like maximum honesty. You take it to a level that I've never seen before. And that's something I want to ask you. What is the importance of Stoicism in the online fitness community? And why do you talk so much about that theme with your book analyses? Okay. All the series you have.
Excellent question. I don't know about you. I want to keep going. So
I love this, man.
People in my channel are used to part 2s and 3s and 4s because the segment runs so long. So if you watch this and you enjoy it up to this point, there is much more to come. And we're going to discuss Stoicism, maybe more spirituality-based questions. Talking about masculinity could be a good idea, but I think we have much more to discuss together.
Absolutely, man. And I've loved our conversation. We spoke about things that I don't think you're going to find anywhere else in YouTube fitness. And I just really appreciate you being here, honestly. Not just talking with me one-on-one, but having the balls to speak up against the craziness that's out here and creating your channel, Natural Hypertrophy. I feel you've made a massive difference in the world, and I'm so excited for your channel to keep growing, and you got my support all the way, and man, I can't wait for a part 2.
Same, and thank you, Alex, for giving my voice, in a sense, a platform, a place where I can express it to people who don't know me, people who might join the channel at some point. If you do, you're welcome. I recommend you use the playlists so that we can all be that big family that natural bodybuilding was always supposed to be. and one that at the end of the day will take work, but once we have it, it'll all be worth it.
You better believe it.